Very dramatic.
Hey, he's a dramatic angle. All right, we are live. Hello, everyone. We come to you with another episode of the Noise Floor on this brisk Saturday.
Day.
Today we're going to talk about art, and I think,
Yeah, no, we definitely
have a show.
Yeah.
We have a show. As always, I'm joined by one listener, one Blen, and one Cameron. Big thanks to everyone for joining. I don't know if we're going to talk about philosophy this stream.
I mean, art is philosophy.
Well, there is the forever question of what is art, that is sort of like baked into this topic.
Which I think we're going to have to get into.
Yeah, of course.
Up there with what is love? Baby, don't hurt me.
Baby, don't hurt me. Yeah, exactly. Before we launch into the stream, though, just a little bit of housekeeping. Blaine, if you wouldn't mind doing the honors of letting folks know if. Well, actually, I was going to ask you. Like you've thrown that HD 800 over your shoulder. I don't know how many times at this point. And should it ever break? Yeah, should it ever break, and you would need to buy a new headphone, where would you go to get that? Where should a person go to get that?
You don't want me to answer this. This isn't the lead-in you think it is. I'd go to the
used
market.
Absolutely not the correct lead-in.
You'd go to the used market and get another HD 800 with an SDR mod or something.
No SDR. Fuck SDR.
Many of them would have SDR mods, and you have to reverse it, right?
I know, you have to take it fucking out.
Okay, supposing that you were going to buy an HD 800S, where would a person go to purchase one of those?
Yes.
Blaine, who employs you? Let's put it that way.
Well, all right, here we get into a complicated legal question.
No.
No. As always, Headphones.com presents this program, this channel, and quite a lot of other content. It is your number one place to learn about and buy audio equipment, headphones, speakers, DACs, amps, cables, and probably other stuff that I'm forgetting. Available on Headphones.com with a limited selection on Headphones.ca, available to our Canadian audience. In addition to the Headphone Show YouTube channel, we have the audio files hosted on Headphones.com, our forum.headphones.com, and our Discord, discord.gg/headphones. You should join all of them, and as always, you should buy from Headphones.com, confident that you have a 365-day return policy. We are pretty lenient on that, frankly. As long as you're not a complete dick, you are pretty much good to make sure that you will get a headphone that you are happy with in the end, even if you end up buying the wrong one the first time.
That should be like the slogan underneath. As long as you're not a complete dick, we're pretty lenient about it.
Sadly, people have been complete dicks.
Yeah,
we're really trying to just be like to design the policy for the people who aren't dicks and who just want to get a headphone that works for them for their $1,000, which is very fair.
And that's the ideal, right? Like the thought process at the very beginning was, what would we want? What would be the ideal utopia? Not the headphone. What would be the ideal like headphone utopia experience? And it would be, well, I don't know if I'm going to like this, but this seems like a lot of people like it, so I want to check it out. I want to try and see if I like it. And then if you don't, oh well, maybe there's something else. So you don't feel stuck with a paperweight that you don't ever use.
Yeah, or having to resell it and take a big loss. Like, honestly, it's a situation where for a merchant willing to take the hit on it, it makes a lot of sense because it means that people don't have the risk factor. Because the majority of people can't actually just go to to a Can Jam, don't actually have a headphone shop like the Hangout or like Zeppelin or like, frankly, there aren't that many good ones outside of Singapore, if I'm to be perfectly honest. So demoing opportunities are really limited. The historical solution was that you bought a lot of stuff on the used market to like demo it, and then you resold it at a minimal loss. But having an option that ships 2-day to most of the US, sometimes faster, and has guaranteed stock is quite a bit more convenient for people. So I'm glad that we do it.
Better than Amazon. All right, let's move into the show. Unless there's any more housekeeping, I don't think there is.
No.
Oh yes, there's one other thing.
There is.
Yeah, I don't know if you're planning on doing this, but we're gonna try and make this stream a little bit shorter. we'll see. I
Sure,
think
Bear.
Blaine and Griffin might migrate then eventually to our Discord to continue conversations there. I don't know if you guys plan to do that today, but
Depends on
that
if we still
works.
got stuff to say.
Exactly.
But we
So
are going to try to do a stop at 3 hours.
yeah. So with that in mind, the topics for today are all about art and whether or not, well, not all the topics are, but that's the main one. Are headphones art? And by the way, these topics, many of them come from the forum. So if you guys want your topics to be considered, check the forum that should be linked in the description and add your topics there. And we will potentially have them for a future stream. But topic number one is, are headphones art? And I like this question or this topic a lot because certainly there is a sense in which we could consider headphones kind of like the nexus of art and science. That's sort of a line that I think many folks have been running with.
I mean,
Where
that
they
sounds
are,
like a bastardization of Sean's personal tagline of science in the service of art.
yeah, sure. But the idea is they are sound delivery devices, playback equipment, essentially, but also beautiful objects. Ideally, right? Not all of them are. Many of them are not beautiful objects, but you get the point that there is a you wear them, you put them on your head. It's kind of like a there's that sort of like personal element to it, similar to how like speakers, they're furniture in addition to being like a sound delivery device. Um, where do you guys? I had an analogy, and maybe we can start there. I think one of the debates that I come across regular, or one of the ways that people kind of like talk about headphones online is to make an analogy with fine dining restaurants and food, to say, to basically say like, oh well, you know uh they'll say something like, why would I expect a McDonald's cheeseburger if I'm going to a fine dining restaurant? But I think that's not a good analogy. Rather, the better analogy would be that the headphone is kind of more like the service at the restaurant or the ambiance at the restaurant, because the food is the music. That's the nourishing thing that you're getting, or the plate, I guess, right? The food is the nourishing thing, just like the music is the nourishing thing, and the headphone is the accoutrement to that. It is the thing that makes that possible, because you have to go to the establishment, you have to engage with the service staff, etc. That's kind of where I am with this question, is to say that yes, but minimally.
I mean, I think that the big issue with that is that headphones have a much larger impact than plates or ambiance.
I see. The thing is, though, like, I was recently, I don't know, you say that, right? I went to a restaurant recently where I had such a good experience from it was actually just the bartender. And I thought to myself, yeah, that was a guy who did really well at his job. And I had a much better experience at that establishment because of the service that I got. It wasn't just about the food. And so that's really what made me think of this analogy. That the overall, the whole experience was enhanced. And I get what you're saying, though, because like you can have something be served at a cafeteria with literally no service and have the food be exceptional, right?
Well, I think also more significantly, headphones meaningfully change the content of music.
It's true. Yeah. Oh, much more so than the silverware or whatever, right? Like, or the
unless you're making your silverware out of some very suspicious materials.
Yeah,
there's kind of two ways of looking at this question, though. One being like, is there room for sort of artistic expression in headphones? I think the answer to that for me would be, well, yeah, absolutely. Headphones aren't purely utilitarian devices designed entirely without aesthetics in mind. Like aesthetics and sort of certain subjective tuning aspects are guaranteed and expected, and it wouldn't feel right to have a headphone where it was, this just completely plain gray, purely functional thing. And I think that people aren't looking for that. You can look at examples of physical construction which are leaning much more towards the artistic ones, like Meze or ZMF, and some of them are stunning. But then there's also the way in which people often bring this up, which is that do more esoteric tunings or things that lean a little bit further away from neutral for the purpose of, this is my artistic intent. Like I wanted something which had this shape to the mid-range or something because this is my artistic sort of way of presenting the music. And I think that my answer to that would be yes, they absolutely can be, but it's not necessarily an excuse for poor performance. Like you have to accept to some degree that if you tune a headphone for artistic intent or for whatever reason, away from what either people we know generally prefer or what is going to be perceived as neutral, it's going to be more polarizing. There's going to be more people that sort of have an issue with it. And a lot of people say, well, you can't just treat headphones like a better or worse thing. It's art as much as it is science, which is fair, but it doesn't mean that headphone's not got these things which make it sound colored.
Yeah. I think that's, I don't know why Blaine left the room. Jeez.
Blaine is dead.
Yeah.
No, refreshing, because sometimes that fixes the slideshow.
It does, yeah. Yeah. So I guess I like that you kind of like separated into two ways of thinking about it, because like I think we all generally, I don't know, maybe not all of us, but it's a generally safe assumption to say that, it's nice when things look and feel nice, right?
Yeah.
But the bigger question, I think, is the second one, which is, headphones as art, as a way of interpreting the music, as somebody's interpretation, or they're putting their editorialization on the sound. Should we consider headphones as art in that respect? And I'm of two minds about that. Because I would agree that there is absolutely room for tasteful coloration, right? That's what people like. Plus, there's a pretty wide range, as we know, of what people actually like, and also how people actually hear these things.
Kind of the problem with tasteful coloration as a concept is that that requires a reference. And that reference is
exactly colored from what, right? And we don't, because for one person, sure, but across the population, it's going to fall somewhere. Well, I say that. Then there's headphones like the Abyss stuff, right? Where it's like, coloration to the max. But also headphones like the Warwick Aperio, right? That's an example of where and the non-GSC I'm thinking of, right? Where there are meaningful colorations to that headphone that people perceive as enjoyable in some fashion. Maybe not everybody, you guys probably don't, but it's a commonly well received headphone for detail, and I would also agree it does sound very, very detailed because of its colorations. And so the question there is is that interpretation, is that like somebody taking artistic license to put their editorialization on the sound, and should we treat it the same way we would treat some, I don't know, like a painter's rendition of a scene, right, where it's like their interpretation of what's going on.
Well, the Abyss stuff's a good example of this, because like the 1266, that's a very colored headphone. It's got a lot of wacky characteristics to it, and that's why I personally like it. Like, it's got some stuff about it which for certain genres of music I find really enjoyable because it's colored in sort of ways that happen to work. But
the effect,
I think the issue for me is when I say I like the Abyss, it's those colorations also mean it has issues. Like the timbre on it is screwed, kind of, to be honest. And when you sort of talk about a headphone or something to someone or post it online or whatever, and people basically sort of kind of come back with the defense that, well, this, headphones are art, and so it's not fair to criticize it because it's, it's up to the individual interpretation, or you just don't like this manufacturer or this person's artistic
Meanwhile,
expression.
art criticism is a massive industry.
Well, yeah, but also, I mean, being art doesn't mean that it's free from criticism, and also doesn't actually change what I'm saying. Like, if I'm saying I think that, there's certain aspects of this which I do like and certain things which I don't like, or maybe I just don't like it at all, or whatever, it doesn't really matter. Me saying I think that this is colored and for these reasons I don't like it, coming back and saying, well, it's art, it's like, okay, well, I don't like this artistic impression then. It doesn't actually matter you call it art or not.
I don't think that calling it art absolves a product from criticism. I don't think that's a fair
Hmm.
like uh you know diversion from oh, this has this problem that I hear at whatever, like
Well,
you get what
the
I mean, right?
question there is whether art is, because it is subjective and rated by enjoyment, inherently isolated from sort of a judgment beyond I personally dislike this, and that's a question whether you can be prescriptive about art. But that's a
Ah,
fairly
and there are schools of thought on
philosophical.
this.
Yes.
Yes.
I just wanted to say that I think that ADVC in chat said something that I had been sitting on and was going to say on my turn. Headphones are like the lighting, room placement, and I would add frame for music, right?
Well, frame
Because
was the
headphones,
one that I ran with on Twitter like a while ago. Like the painting
but
is
it's
the
more
frame.
than a frame because it's also the lighting, because it
Yeah, yeah.
changes literally the color. Like the lighting that you expose a painting to changes the perception in the same way the frequency response of a headphone changes the perception.
Yeah.
So there's a question of whether being a museum curator makes you an artist, and I would say that it does, right? Like there is an art to arranging and showing art.
Is a library scientist a scientist?
This is a different question. Weird fact, when I was a teenager, multiple people recommended that that be my major in college. Not sure what that says.
I can see it.
I will say I think headphones are art twofold, though. Like, I think that it's best to treat them as two separate art objects. On the
Yeah.
one hand, they are a coloration slash, I mean, coloration is sort of the whole fallacy of accuracy thing. They have an impact on the sound, and they have a physical identity. As physical objects, they're unambiguously art, right? They're like a piece of industrial design, and industrial design is an art. It's in the sound things where things get a little bit more contentious, because some people have this concept of, oh, there is some fundamental true essence to the music that some stuff is mangling or misrepresenting or what have you, right? And that premise, I think, animates a lot of the idea of whether or not headphones are art. The people who are, shall we say, reproductionists may not be inclined to think of them that way, like Sean Olive with the wine glass metaphor, right?
Yeah. Yeah. The wine. Okay, so the wine glass metaphor, I always struck me as kind of funny because, like I think the typical analogy to the wine industry gets made not so much because of the wine glass thing, but because you can have really inexpensive wine that's considerably better than the really expensive stuff, and in blind tests, people don't necessarily prefer the expensive stuff. That analogy, holds for, let's say, the industry and sound quality generally. But to consider the headphone like the wine glass, and that it should be transparent to let the wine, and the wine is the music, right? To let the wine, be its truest self, is one that, like, I understand the spirit of this. I feel like in practice, this is not. This has some scrungles.
Yep. Yeah.
You know
The
what I mean?
longer I've had to ponder that analogy,
Yeah.
the more it's kind of fallen
Well,
apart to me. And in general, I feel like it speaks to a bit of a tendency for the, say, more scientifically minded to try and separate
yeah.
art and science more than they actually are separated. Like in most arts, there is some sort of improvement that can be made to your artistic output by learning more about the underpinning science that your art like exists upon. Like when it comes to being a musician, let's say, just because it's the closest possible thing, um, learning more about how your amplifier's tone stack works, or how sound propagating out of your amplifier would work, or how tuning drums works due to the dimensions and stiffness of the volume and containing
To be fair,
membranes.
if we're talking about people with drums or amplifiers, I'd like them to start with being able to read sheet music. I think that would
Yeah.
be a good start.
I thought you were gonna say I'd like to start with them being able to read, which would have been
Well,
way
I mean,
further.
that's only for the drummers.
But also
Oh.
I am so opposed to that. Actually, I think reading sheet music has its uses, but I think in many ways it's kind of like music theory, where you don't really need to know it to make good art.
Some of the
It's
best
much more
I would
musicians
helpful
argue
for
ever.
communicating art,
Yeah,
and sheet
Yeah.
music is much
some
the
of the best
same. But
musicians ever have
O-
no idea how to read sheet music.
yeah, I mean,
Honestly, I would say that
so-
in terms of this stuff, like with what's related or applicable to understanding sort of audio equipment, a lot of the non-music theory related things related to music production, like more the engineering side of things, that's a lot more useful.
Yeah.
And honestly, I mean that is something which more people should do. Like if you have never tried producing music, try it.
Yeah.
FL Studio, I think they've got like a 30% sale on right now or something. And there's free tools available as well. You don't need to know music theory in order to produce music. It definitely helps, and it's definitely something which, if you want to get into it, you should do. But just producing music and getting a better understanding of a lot of the different like mastering and mixing techniques in particular, that actually will give you a much better understanding of how a lot of the stuff relating to like headphone perception and speaker perception relates to what we're hearing, rather than music theory itself, I would say.
Yeah.
Did
Yeah.
did
To go
Griffin
back
just
to
become an explosion of pixels for anyone else?
no, he looks very clear for me.
Okay, Griffin is art for me right now. Hold on, I'll take a picture.
Griffin is
Oh, that's so
always
nice.
Griffin is
Thanks,
always
Blaine.
art for me.
I posted that
I
in the Discord in Lounge, so if anyone wants to see it, you'll have to join our Discord.
you will be
Sorry, I know it's
compelled.
not spicy hour yet, but Quituwu just
Oh!
said that good production is overrated. I'm sorry, that is a terrible take. You
Yeah.
can take that straight back to, yeah, that's bad.
So good production or good mixing?
I mean, either case, I would say
They're
that's a bad
different,
take.
though. They're
They are
different.
different, but I would still say that in
I
either case, it's a bad take.
I don't know, man. I disqualify certain albums because they're poorly produced, even if I
Yeah.
like the music.
I have a playlist of stuff which I don't even like the songs on some of them, but I listen to just because you listen and go, "Oh, that's what the
I don't
hell
know. I still
level of
have music that is
siphoning and
my view is
poorly
that this
mixed
take is
but
cooked.
well produced that I still listen to fairly often.
I
I
can't
listen to
listen.
folk music, punk, and metal, so all the music I
Yeah.
listen to is poorly produced.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but do you listen to Emperor?
No.
Do you listen to Burzum?
I mean,
Like,
I
I
feel
have
like
listened to Burzum. It's not
The-
really my sound, to be
The
honest.
production is intended to be art, just that it's intended to be bad.
yeah, yeah. Okay. So hold on.
But I want to go. I want to go
bringing it
back to
all.
the yeah. I want to
Yeah,
go back to the
bringing it all
wine glass
back.
analogy because
Yes,
here's the thing.
me too.
Even with the wine glass analogy, there are different types of wine glasses that are suitable for different wines. So and maybe this is folks aren't familiar with this, but like for a white wine, particularly a German varietal, you would actually want a small, kind of like a thinner, almost more like kind of fluted is the wrong word, but a smaller kind of thinner opening for the wine glass because it actually has an effect on the aroma, right? The bouquet. With a heavier red style of wine glass, you actually want it to be a fatter wine glass because you want to aerate it more, right? And so the analogy of the headphone should be the glass. I mean, if we take it to the fullest extent of that analogy, yeah, there might be something there might be something there, right? But I think the idea that like it's supposed to be this pure, transparent thing that has no effect on the music, that analogy doesn't really hold because even in wine, it has an effect on it.
Yeah, I want to be clear. I want to make sure that we're not doing the thing we always do where Sean says something like kind of offhand and then we just like attack it for like way
Well,
more
it's not
time than
attacking
Sean
it.
spent
It's
thinking
more
about
accurate
it.
to say we
I don't mean like
dissect
actually
it
attack it.
To analyze
Just more
it.
like
Wait,
It's
mind you
analyzing it.
down until it is
Okay, but
done.
hold on. There is one other thing. The big thing with all of this, specifically to do with the question of like coloration as art, is that, to me at least, that I, we often talk. People often talk about how like art is often in its interpretation, right? Like so the audience, there's a necessary relationship there. In a sense, this also works for headphone sound because the experiences people actually have of these things are different. They are personal experiences that people are having. They're not so like, and we talk about this in terms of like, HPTF variation and stuff like that, right? Um, if everybody were
Yeah.
having the
Okay.
same experience, uh, uh, we do this sort of like thought experiment in aesthetics. If everybody were having literally the same experience of a piece of art, right? Whether it's going to the movies or looking at a painting or whatever, reading a book, if everybody has the same experience of it, would everybody come to the same conclusion about whether or not it's good? And I would say that I'd pose the same
No.
question to headphones and coloration. If everybody were having the same experience, would they come to the same conclusion about whether or not it's good?
I think no, just for the simple reason that even if everyone were having the exact same actual experience, like, well, okay, does that assume that psychological biases, expectation bias, and placebo and stuff are also non-factors?
Yeah.
Yeah, like
Because if
Well,
what
they,
also we
constitutes an
okay,
listen
I
to
mean, well,
different
experience?
music, and different
Well, you
music
have to
objectively
basically.
has an impact on preference.
I mean, this is
because
why it's
assuming,
a thought experiment because in practice
yeah,
it's never possible, right?
assuming you're ignoring HPTF variation and all this kind of stuff, so everyone's getting the exact same, response to their eardrum. I would still say that people are going to argue till the end of time and will not come to the same conclusion simply for the reason that price bias,
All
expectation
the other
bias,
biases, yeah.
all the
I
other kind
mean,
of things
you
are
cut
still going to
through
have a
that
massive
though.
impact.
Like we know from the research that what people listen to, what people like to listen to, has an impact on the coloration that they prefer for headphones, right?
Hmm.
Like people like me who don't listen to very bassy music are
I
much more forgiving of bass issues.
As part of this, though, I sort of assumed that as part of the situation, everyone, like, all the music is assumed to be kind of produced and mastered in the same way. Like,
Well,
you're
sure,
getting the
but even
same
if it's
experience with the headphone, regardless of what you're listening to, if that makes sense. But
well, sure,
yeah,
all the
I mean,
music can be produced and mastered the same, but different music will have different requirements anyway. Like
well,
nothing will make a violin concerto revealing of problems in low bass.
we should talk about this a little bit later because we have a dedicated topic on it, though. So we should
Yes,
probably hold
true.
off on that one. I did want to
Also, I
ask a
wanted
quick
to
question, which is sort of a tangent on this topic and following on from the discussion we had earlier about production stuff. What are your guys' thoughts on music being art in terms of the actual composition of the music, the actual notes being played and instruments and stuff like that, and the production, mixing, engineering, and everything else that goes into it? Because I
two
think, as we
separate
sort of
arts.
lightly touched on, there's, I mean, for me, well, you can make an analogy to paintings, right? Some paintings are impressive because it's some fantastic landscape that's, got all these bright colors and mythical creatures or something, whatever, it doesn't really matter. But it's not impressive because of the techniques done by the painter. It's the thing being shown in the painting.
Well, there
Whereas
is,
other
yeah, I
stuff,
get what
like
I
you're saying.
love
the
that
Mona
your
Lisa,
reference point for art is a panel van.
well, no, but well, okay. No, but on the other hand, the Mona Lisa isn't impressive because it's showing something like insanely impressive. It's a woman sat like that, but it's
Without
impressive
eyebrows.
because of the actual technique and quality of production involved.
Cameron is now the Mona Lisa with that.
Yep. Next
I mean,
thumbnail sorted.
what this kind of speaks to, I think, is that most arts that we treat as like one thing, like in terms of their one like exported product, like in this case music, is actually a whole bunch of little arts like stacking on top of each other, and pretty much all art is multidisciplinary in some respects. When
Yes,
it comes
to
to
make
like
a
the
painting, first you
delineation,
must make paint and brushes.
yeah. I mean, if you're taking it from the very beginning, but like even for just a, like a person playing an instrument, right? Like there is the art of uh, improvisation, which is completely separate from the art of like
Pa-
technical skill,
Paint
which
Cameron
is
like one of your
completely
French girls.
separate from the art of like melodic phrasing, which is completely separate from the more technical aspects of like knowing how your instrument works and knowing how to make it sound a certain way. Um, I think if you mine deep enough, like you'll find in music, but also in like the other, I kind of what people would traditionally think of as art, you'll find that there are so many underlying arts beneath that there's a reason people can spend their entire
So
lives studying it.
I had something about this. So to get to what was Cameron's point about the distinction between the technical facility that a person has in the arts creation, uh, and the what's being represented or what's being captured. Um, there are people who will have the most incredible, like, say they're painting a picture of a dog, right? they'll have the most incredible and precise, like lines and everything, a technique. And then there are people who can, with one single brushstroke, capture the essence of dog in the same, like so a person who's like, oh, that's a picture of a dog. And there is something to that where it's like, yeah, it's not nearly as like technical as the person with like every fine little, thing, but it's a stylistically compelling interpretation, where the fact that someone's to me, it's like there is artistry in the in the skill of being able to capture whatever it is, right?
Yeah, I
As
mean,
this
this is
relates to,
just photorealism versus
yeah,
stylization.
versus style, yeah. And so I don't want to undersell that as this relates to audio. I'm not entirely sure, but the one thing I was going to say to do with audio is, there is something weird about, how like you can put a headphone on and as long as it's not like super weird, for the most part, our brains can kind of adjust to this. There is a sense in which we eventually are just listening to the music, and after our brains are kind of like normalizing, whatever colorations. If we're actually genuinely listening to the music, we are not actually experiencing the headphone as art. We're not, or its colorations or its unique editorialization on the sound as art. After a while, right? We're actually experiencing the music as art, and it eventually sort of becomes more like Sean's transparent glass, if that makes sense.
Chat's being mean
Well,
today. Someone's saying, considering you like 21 Pilots, I don't think you should be commenting, Cameron. Some of the 21
Owned.
Pilots albums have been excellent
Wrecked.
production. Greg
Destroyed.
Calby from Sterling Sound did the mastering for the last like 3, I think, and he did a great job.
So
But
he's
is this
doubling
one of
down.
is this one of the records that's on your playlist of songs you don't like but are so well mixed that are like
no, it's not
they're
like
good?
that level, but it's
Okay.
it's good. But I mean, this is the thing. There's some artists who their only interest is the music itself. They don't spend much time, or they outsource, or just don't do much like mixing, mastering work. And so,
I'd say
regardless of
that's
how good
probably
the song
a
is,
majority of them are probably just
I would
focusing
say
on
so, yeah.
making
And
the
so,
songs. Yeah.
yes, they make the songs, and then the production isn't all that great. But then there's other ones like Nils Fram, for example. There was an interview done with him a little while
Nils Fromm is
ago,
a great
and
example of it. Yeah,
he's fantastic. And because he's got this particular quote which I really like, because they were saying, well, some artists, when they're going through the sort of production process, or if you are doing your own mixing and mastering, you don't want to just do it on studio monitors and then that's that. You kind of tune it so that with the thought in mind that a lot of people are going to be listening to this in the car, on bassier headphones, this sound bars, this kind of stuff. What is your approach to getting your music sounding right on those sort of systems? And his quote was, "I don't care. I just want to make music for people with good speakers."
yeah.
So, and his stuff
thing
sounds
is,
fantastic.
okay,
He's
the
spent
thing
so
is,
much
with
effort and time doing that.
Nils Fromm though, there is like one song that I actually genuinely want to listen to from his stuff. Like, I get what he's doing and it's cool that he does it, but I don't, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
it's,
Oh no, I totally get it. I'm more into some of his stuff, but I kind of like the slightly more abstract things. There are some. I'm just going to bring up my like Rune playlist now if this loads, because there's some other artists. I mean, like from an electronic music one, just off the top of my head, like Max Cooper, for example. Max Cooper does some really cool electronic music and spends so much effort on the like just tweaking tiny little bits. And if you've ever produced electronic music yourself, you can listen to some of it and go, that might not sound like super impressive off the bat, but I know that you spent like a good half an hour to an hour just getting that one sound sounding exactly that way.
well, this is why I keep, recommending that Adam Baldich, Adam
Yeah,
Baldich.
that album's
It's like,
fantastic.
even if you're not into, violin quartets, shit is insane for how well it is recorded, how well it's produced, because it's also hard to
Yeah.
do that, you know?
Yeah,
It's
it's really hard. I mean, there's a reason why even like most live recordings don't sound
Yeah.
that good, because it
Yeah.
takes a lot of effort. Reed Willis is another artist, which I think I've mentioned on the podcast before. He
Yep.
does some
So I actually
Smug
think there are a
folk
lot of
noises.
examples of this kind of artist, of this kind of musician. Like Steely Dan's a classic example of, a band who cared so much about the recording quality that some would say it negatively impacted both their mental
Yeah.
health as well as like the music itself. But it's
Only a
an
fool would
interesting
say that
moment.
was based, though.
What'd you say?
Nothing.
Okay.
They dropped my favorite diss track of the 70s.
We'll discuss that later because I want to know which one you're talking about. But it gives an interesting opportunity to connect it back to headphones, because I do feel like there are instances where certain people, certain headphone designers, are busy enough chasing what they perceive as the science, usually something regarding measurements, that I think they do lose sight of perhaps the art of presenting music to a person. That I don't want to say that targeting a scientific goal will always lead to that kind of uh, less ideal presentation to people. But I do think there are some instances where, for example, the DCA Expanse, where I think he was very focused on doing something that was, you know, I think reasonably so perceived by Dan as a scientific goal, making an open back headphone with, whatever tools necessary, whether it be the AMTS or electrical filters, to make it hit a certain response that was seemingly likely to be preferred by a lot of people. And it just, for a lot of people, seems to have just missed the mark. I wonder if it's not as common in headphones because the science is a lot less developed in headphones than it is in like music production. Like obviously
I don't
music
know.
production is like more of an art, but it also
I don't
has
know.
more of like an orthodoxy that kind of is proven to work.
So I this there I know Blaine had a thing. I just wanted to raise something that Stephen Wilson said in his presentation at Munich High End,
Mm.
where we were sort of we're asking basically about the choice to mix for immersive audio, um, and how you would approach something like that while ensuring that because these are like for a lot of it, it's not new mixes, it's
Up mixes.
previous existing stuff. So it's like, how do you approach that while maintaining the sort of like original artistic thing about it? And his response was very much, I think I'm quoting him verbatim, I approach it like an idiot, which is to say, if it sounds cool, I do it. And I think there's an element of that in all of this. It's just like, if it sounds cool, you don't need it doesn't need to follow the science. It doesn't need to be whether we're talking about the music production side of things or we're talking about like playback equipment design. I think for a lot of people that's where they're at. If it sounds cool, they do it, and they don't have a specific, these are the standards that I'm trying to hit, these are the things that I'm trying to follow. And on the one hand, it's good if people are aiming at certain standards and certain design uh criteria, because if they don't, we end up with weird stuff and it doesn't sound very good to people. But there is also an element of like, we have to actually listen to this stuff and ensure that it sounds cool and sounds good. That at the end of the day is like, you can approach it like a bit of an idiot if you want to, or like you have to kind of like step outside of your I don't know, science nervosa. Uh,
I mean,
That's a
and
good way to put it.
to
yeah,
some degree, a lot of our job is to nitpick, though. Like you can look at a great piece of art and it's a fantastic piece of art, and an art critic will go in and talk about certain tiny little mistakes or brush techniques that shouldn't have been used here or whatever. And that's okay. It doesn't necessarily take away from the enjoyment of the art for most people. And some people may argue that, they find those imperfections beneficial to their enjoyment of that piece of art. But it doesn't necessarily, negate the fact that, it's the art critic's job to try and talk about some of the objective stuff where possible. And it's the same thing for us. It's like, just because we've got nitpicks about a headphone or a piece of art in the form of a headphone, it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm not sure where I'm actually going with this. our job is to nitpick, and being art doesn't necessarily excuse it from being criticized, but it also doesn't mean that, like, you can just go and do kind of anything and expect no one to either take issue with it or
So
actually
that's the
appreciate it.
thing. That's the thing. Like it's people can do anything. It's just because it is art.
I
But
would say
So,
none of us are
like art, you can
relativists about art.
expect your art to be
Yeah.
called bad by people on the internet.
Yeah, like none of us are relativists about art, and I think that's like we'll
So
happily say, oh, at least I'm not a relativist about art. I think you can say this piece of music is crap, just like you can say this tuning is crap, or this painting is crap, or this book is crap, right?
So I think we should probably dissect that a bit. And quite some time ago now, Mark Ryan said, I think you have to define art before you can answer this question. There is an implied definition of art which underpins any non-relativist view of art, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is that it has a purpose, that it can be rated in terms of quality for that purpose. Where do we sit on what makes art art? What is the meaning of art?
I think implicitly we would all probably take the non-relativist approach to, because otherwise, what the fuck are we doing? You know, like if we genuinely, you know, follow the steps to its natural conclusion there, like, you know, we would probably take the non-relativist approach, and I think it would land somewhere in what you just described, Blaine.
The Oxford Dictionaries classifies it as the expression or application of human creative skill and imagination, typically in a visual form, such as painting or sculpture, producing works to be appreciated primarily for their beauty or emotional power. I guess that kind of applies to headphones, like
It does,
pretty much
but
spot on.
the bigger
I
thing
would go
is
a little
more the
bit wider.
philosophical question. Yeah, it's a bit like what Blaine said about it having a purpose and a I forget
Well, and that
exactly
is
the
bundled
words.
in there. And
Yeah,
from my
the
point of view, you can sort of spin art a couple of ways, though. Like, you can say art is about evoking a certain response in people. And in that case, we can absolutely rate it, right? Like, movies can be said to be bad if they do not invoke the intended
well,
emotions,
that
which
would be
are,
a necessary but not sufficient condition for art.
well, yes.
That's see, exactly for the reason for what just popped up in chat.
So what I was going to say before any of the definitions were offered was that it's an intentional human contribution to the emotional state of another human.
Does that mean bullying is art?
Exactly, right? That's
Hell yeah, bullying's an art. Have you met Tam?
Based.
Yeah. But no, I think it's okay. I tend to think it's kind of like pornography. You know it when you see it.
I feel like
I'm
it's a bit of a cop-out
eternally
answer. I
dissatisfied
get what you
with
mean,
this
but
definition.
Good stuff. Next topic.
Also, I do think that, like, let me think about this a second. One of the things is that we use art to describe things which are aesthetically pleasing, which also is a category that includes completely non-intentional things. E.g., if I see a sunset, there is no intentionality in it. But if
I'm not
someone,
sure that I would call a sunset art though.
no, but
It's
it
not,
has,
No,
you know,
no,
a
but
human-produced
what
thing.
you're saying, if you see a picture of a sunset, there is intentionality there.
wait, but what I'm saying is that the joy I experience seeing the real sunset with no intentionality, no art, and the picture of the sunset are very similar. Like, they're both aesthetic appreciations for a sensory experience.
Now, this is
So none.
interesting because when you're looking at a picture of a sunset, you're not necessarily appreciating the sunset. You're appreciating the picture of the sunset. But when you're thinking wistfully of a sunset, you are not thinking wistfully of a picture of a sunset. There is a connection between the two that does create your mental process of like, oh yeah, a sunset, right?
I
Because if you
feel
didn't
like
guess
have
I'm
that,
just
what's the
not.
dangerously
point?
close to philosophy at this point.
No, it is. It is.
Yeah,
But like,
well,
if you
for
didn't
sure.
have that, what would be the point of where would be the there for the picture of the sunset? There
Yeah, no,
is.
I mean, I think my answer there would just be that the reason that a sunset is not art is just because, as said, there's no human creation / intention behind it. Whereas a
Yeah.
picture, even if it's just a basic photo, there is a human creation / intention behind it.
Is art all right? So let's put this in a sort of a black box though. What about the things where like animals paint paintings which are in some ways resembling abstract art? You know, if you are shown a
I'd
picture of
call that art.
splatter art,
I
you
don't
can't
think it needs to be
necessarily know.
human necessarily. I mean, I
Well,
think
I
it.
mean,
Well,
a random process could
You're
generate splatter art is what I'm saying. So you could be shown something, and without knowing if there's intentionality, you can appreciate it as art. So is it something where the moment you know that there was no intentionality in something, it stops being art?
kind of
I
to me.
potentially. I mean, because like AI art, for example,
I
like
would say it
AI can create some
lacks
absolutely
artistic
visually.
whatever.
Well, but
Like
this is this is
the
this is
AI
the
stuff can
this
create
is the Andy
visually
Warhol
stunning
thing.
pictures, but I don't get any emotional response from it at all because I
Yeah.
kind of just see it as this artificial slot. It's like,
Yeah,
Well,
am I
you
but
say
good?
that,
this
but
is
like
the,
again,
But
if you didn't know that, is the context required? Like, if there is a true death of the author, can art exist, or is the authorial intent
nah.
fundamental
This
to
is this
art
is the
being
I
most
would say it
appreciable?
this is the
can, but
most
it
annoying
takes
thing
away
of
from
like
it significantly.
this is the most annoying thing of aesthetics, where it's like you get like this. It really is the Andy Warhol bit. Andy Warhol, Steve Reich, John Cage, all of this stuff, and I'm happy to say that all of that stuff's crap. Fight me.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm on
Like,
board with anything that attacks Andy Warhol,
Yeah,
except
it's like
for
like
Valerie Solanas.
the thing is though, like it is genuinely an important thing to have been done to elicit a conversation about the thing. Great, but I'm not out there emotionally invested in fucking soup cans, and I never will be. Right, just because it's or 433. I'm not gonna go to my Spotify or Tidal playlist and go 433. That's on my listening list. No, nobody's doing that. If
Yeah,
433 is on your Tidal playlist, you are pretentious. I'm sorry. Does it even
If
exist on Tidal?
so,
I'm
in the
curious.
example of the giving the monkey the paint or whatever,
hmm
I think
I
one
must.
could argue that whoever gave the monkey the paint is the one with the artistic intent here, just as the person putting in the prompt to the AI art maker is the one responsible for the output.
I
Oh
actually quite
no
like that.
way.
That's
I mean,
quite good.
433 is on Tidal.
yeah, of
What
it's
is
course it
it?
also
is.
on Spotify for some
Oh my
reason.
god.
Sorry, Cameron, what were you
Uh,
saying?
I was saying I quite like that explanation. Um, and it was kind of interesting. I mean, did you guys ever see the court case thing about the monkey taking the photo and Wikipedia getting sued and stuff? The
Yes, the
photographer.
No.
monkey selfie.
Basically, photographer gave a monkey his camera and the monkey took a selfie. Wikipedia used that image. I don't know exactly what for. The photographer sued Wikipedia saying you can't use my photo. And Wikipedia says it's not your photo, it's the monkey's photo. And he ended up losing because the courts decided
that's
that
hilarious.
it's not up to you. It's the monkey that took the photo. But in the context of art, where and this sounds a lot like more grim than it is, but you because I think for the most part, with some possible exceptions, it's not really fair to consider animals as having artistic intention. You can almost kind of consider like the person giving the monkey a paintbrush or whatever as using the animal as a tool for the production
Yeah,
of art.
using the monkey as
But
the
the point being
paintbrush.
that
Yeah.
no matter which way you look at it, there's definitely intention behind it.
In a
Um,
way, though, it also is depending on the era that you're identifying with. You get very different answers to to sort of the overarching question, right? Like if you're in the postmodernist era, you have like shit gets real weird. If you're
yeah,
in the modernist era, it's like weird, but it actually is more just like philosophically making a point, and it's less about any specific aesthetic interpretation.
long-haired
If
cheese
you're
is the best piece of art to ever exist.
you get lots of R mutts. If oh sorry, gonna you get is it it's the urinal at an angle thing, right? Or poop in the
Yeah.
gallery, right? You get depending on where you go with this, right? And to me at least, and this is where my limitation kicks in, i kind of just bracket a lot of the more postmodern stuff and even some of the modern stuff out of my typical Blaine's PC crashed, that's why.
Yeah.
He says
I was wondering.
postmodernism crashed his PC, which is fair. It does do these kinds of things.
I mean, because
And
it's often about yeah, because there's certain particularly more modern pieces of art where I struggle to kind of see or get any emotional anything out of it
okay,
because it's
here-
it's almost like the art itself is being obtuse and just being like, look, I've got this
it's just being
can
an
of soup
asshole. Yeah. Here's
cheese with
okay.
hair.
I have a question for you. How do you feel about Rothko's?
Love him.
Uh,
One of my favorites of all time.
Like, do you genuinely love Rothko's?
Love him so much. Like,
I can't tell if you're being serious.
no, 100% like one of my favorites of all time. It's like James McNeill Whistler and then probably Rothko.
Really?
I'm neutral on that because on one hand, I don't feel that it's like as sort of just bluntly obtuse as either the can of soup or the
No,
long
it's
head
not.
cheese
It's not
or
just being an
whatever.
asshole, right?
So,
Like,
so
it is
I will
genuinely
say
art.
I have not looked into Rothko at all as far as his philosophy on art or anything like that. I don't know
Yeah.
anything about art. I just look at Rothko's paintings and I like them. They are
So-
nice.
Yeah,
to
no,
look at.
visually I like that. That's why
I do not.
I'm
I do not. Like,
But,
I
like
classify them as art, but it's literally just two different colors.
But like, can I?
Two or three, yeah.
An example
Or
of
three.
a piece of art that I like that is in the Tate Modern in London is one of the sinks in the bathroom, because the Tate Modern until recently didn't know it was there because these guys basically, as a bit of a prank, like piece by piece, literally bolt by bolt and tubing and everything, replaced one of the sinks in the bathroom at the Tate Modern with their own one. Absolutely identical. The only difference is that on all the small parts they engrave their name and stuff. And it's like that for me is kind of interesting art because there's a story behind it, intentionality. It's fun. It's interesting. Whereas a lot of the other stuff, it's like, I don't get what you're trying to do here at all. I don't see the point in this. It's not interesting. It's just randomness, effectively.
Yeah.
Like,
What
yeah,
about
seriously, go look at the long head cheese. I don't understand.
I was so the reason I brought up the Rothko thing was I remember this is I can't remember what class I was in, but I remember for some reason we were looking at Rothko's and several people around me just started crying. I was like, "What is happening right now?" These are just several different shades of color.
They're
And-
allergic
but
to
it-
splatter.
But it had no splatter is slightly different. That's like Jackson Pollock, right? Like Rothko is
It's more
right, the
monolithic
walks.
yeah.
than splatter.
But like now, I don't know if these were sort of like if the emotional response was like partly art like induced,
Placebo.
yeah, or induced
Yeah,
in ways
by
that
being
was
an art student and being
but
an
exactly
extra
right.
fertile ground for
Had-
those
Getting
experiences taking place.
seeing a Rothko, right? Like, so
Yeah.
it's like trying to basically like live that life. But for me, I was like, this does literally nothing for me. Like, there's nothing.
Do you know
I could have
the
guessed
story
that
of
would
the
happen.
Jackson
I would
Pollock
if
red
I
dot?
had dude. If I had a Rothko, I would legitimately hang it in my because I think they're I I actually like the colors that are chosen. I think
Yeah,
they're like
his-
cool
They're
in that sense.
aesthetic.
But I don't get any like emotional like oh my god
Um,
the way some people
Do you
do.
know the Do you know the
I
story
definitely
of
get
the
a mood.
Jackson Pollock red dot thing?
The Jackson Pollock red dot thing.
No.
So I'm not 100% sure if this is true or not. I'm pretty sure it is, but just in case. Basically, the story is that Jackson Pollock had some painting and it was mostly black and white of splatters and everything, but there was like one little red dot of paint somewhere in the very corner. And people were sort of theorizing as to what it means and what he was trying to, show as his intent for this. And it's representing us in this vast empty galaxy and stuff. And then someone interviewed him about it and said, like, what is the significance of this red dot? And he looked at it and goes, oh, I must have spilled that bit when I was painting that one.
Yeah,
What?
the people analyzing the red dot are like the people in headphones, like sniffing a graph of like a single
Yeah.
narrow peak in the treble on a
Yeah, I
measurement
wonder
they're
if he
not
put that
familiar with.
half a
So-
dB
so you-
notch there intentionally. It's like, yeah.
On a measurement they're not familiar
Oh,
with.
on a measurement.
Oh,
Okay,
God.
okay, I get what you're saying. Yeah,
I need to
I'm reminded of for one of when I was doing aesthetics, one of the for some reason we ended up doing this trip out to an art studio where this guy had set up a set of basically it was a whole bunch of different little installations, right? And the whole point was to Blaine's sort of, or I can't remember who gave the definition, but like create or elicit a unique experience, right? And he had this one that was in the middle of the room, and you had to walk up a set of stairs and then sit down in a chair on top. And the stairs were they were laid out in such a way that the mere act of walking up them induced nausea. and this was
That's
the
kind
purpose.
of cool, though.
This was the sole function of this art installation, was to induce nausea.
I mean, there was art at the top, right? There was some sort of visual.
No, you just
no?
sat down in a chair.
No, the art was the experience of
The
sitting
art
in a
was-
chair nauseous.
I'd feel
Got it.
exactly. and I remember, like, okay, at this point, we like, yes, it has done something. Yes, there's something cool about this. We have gone too far. You know?
I don't know. I think that's pretty fun.
I mean, sure, it was cool that it was able to do that, but
I become
it's not like-
meaningfully less interested in art as the aesthetic content drops and the conceptual content rises.
Yes, exactly.
I think that's fair.
But I feel like
think that's
this is
fair.
a little bit similar to some of those, bring it back to headphones. This is a little bit similar to some of those, like, really esoteric, tunings that people are going for, right?
Oh, bravo.
Sure.
I mean, I think the 1266 is still a good example of this, especially because it has physical aspects of it that, like, also throw the listener off a little bit. Probably not as intentionally as whatever art piece you're talking about.
Yeah.
But I feel like the fact that it, like, hangs on the strap and kind of floats right outside your ear is another, like, aspect of the
Yeah.
experience that will be negative for a lot of people because
The
it just
weight.
doesn't feel good, but it will contribute positively for some people because it's weird.
The weight and discomfort is art.
I'm just going to share a particular artist I like in chat. This guy, Artem Rad's Cheboka, which I'm probably pronouncing really wrong.
All right.
But his
I-
stuff is just fantastic.
Okay, don't take this the wrong way, but when I first saw this, it looked like AI to me.
I'm not convinced this isn't AI art.
It's not. This guy's been doing this for a long,
right.
long time.
We should bring
No
this
idea.
back to headphones.
We should bring
at
it back
some
to
point.
headphones, though.
We should probably do the
are
next
we
topic, to be honest.
are we
I think we're all in
resolved
agreement.
are we resolved?
So there
that-
is one more thing I want to say.
Okay,
I
go
feel
ahead.
like Cameron said this earlier. The reason this gets brought up so often is often because people are kind of trying to protect their own sensibility of a headphone being good when other people say it's bad,
Yes.
Yeah.
And the person making this defense that a headphone is art, I think we could all agree they are correct. It is art. But there's a way that everyone likes to enjoy art. There's a type of art that people will enjoy, and it's not always going to be the same art. But I think there are a lot of times when art is fairly universally agreed to be good and fairly universally agreed to
Well,
be bad.
I don't know about that. It's more that I like the designation as art doesn't give license to or doesn't, like, make it immune from
Excuse
it doesn't excuse the
things, yeah.
problems and flaws that exist with it. And I think people will regularly do that. They'll
The
say
thing is, it does excuse it for a lot of people.
in their minds, but it doesn't. Well, okay, yeah, like there's that element of, like, because this is the editorialization of from somebody, that it underscores or kind of gives license to its flaws. And to me, I'm not sure that I can quite get there, because again, I do this whole bit with, like, listen to the gear, not the music, if you're actually trying to evaluate it. Like, obviously the end user is going to listen to the music, not the gear, right? And that's a good message. But, like, if you're actually trying to evaluate this, you have to listen to the gear.
Yeah,
right?
you have a
can't
responsibility to
you have a
listen
responsibility.
to the gear.
Yeah. So so to me, it's like, it's a bit like a conversation ender, where it's like, well, that's just, like, your opinion, man.
What is
This
the
is
phrase?
my art.
Terminating cliche.
It do be one of those.
Sorry, I didn't quite hear what Blaine said.
The phrase, I think, is thought terminating cliche.
Yeah, exactly. So, in that sense, it's like, just because we might agree that yes, it is art, that does not put it into the thought terminating cliche.
It does not absolve it of
it's not
criticism the way that you think it's going to. In fact, it kind
Exactly.
of bolsters the idea that we should be critical of it.
Yeah,
Well, I mean, that's
exactly.
just like your opinion, man.
Yeah,
Valid and based.
you're not wrong, just an asshole. Yeah.
So true.
Okay. Next question, or next topic. how much does the circle of confusion or accuracy actually matter? Now, we've done the accuracy bit twice because Blaine's going to say accurate to what? Um,
Well, the
Well,
circle of
I
confusion
did,
actually gives us an answer to that,
yeah.
yeah,
and that's
so
indeed its
that's what's
purpose.
going on here. Yeah.
And I think it's very relevant to the prior topic as well. And we already, brought up a few of the kind of not examples, but kind of corollary examples, like the wine glass thing that are often mentioned in the same breath as the circle of confusion. Blaine, do you want to explain the circle of confusion? I have the graphic from Tools book up where it has the actual circle and then like the two bubbles separating it. I don't know if you're looking at the stream.
Yep, I am. So the circle of confusion is a phrase proposed by Floyd Toole, who was the mentor of Sean Olive and who remains an extremely influential and important scientist in audio. He focuses on speakers mostly based, but we're still obviously in debt to his work. But his premise of the circle of confusion is that recordings are evaluated using speakers, which are evaluated using recordings, which are themselves the product of, the effect of production, which are evaluated on speakers. There's a circular confusion where if there are artifacts of some sort, colorations in a loudspeaker, he alleges, they will end up in recordings. Then when those recordings are evaluated, they will in turn perpetuate those colorations because people will be playing back their reference material on devices that were made using flawed reference material.
As a
The
sort of practical
hypothetical,
example, if like all speakers or most speakers were too bassy, people would produce music with less bass to compensate for that, which then means when
well,
you
this is
judge
alleged.
speakers, alleged, but I kind of feel like it's
If you listen to Bear Dynamic headphones with massive treble peaks, certain Bear Dynamic headphones with massive treble peaks, you may the mix may end up sounding a bit, more muted, muffled in that region.
So the substantive point here is that he's suggesting that we inherently sort of pull against the colorations of each step of the chain, which has the effect of perpetuating those colorations.
Mhm. Yeah.
I have a long-standing gripe with this, which is that we don't actually have evidence that that's the case to the
Which is
extent which he alleges.
there's anecdotal
That's one of the good
examples
criticisms of
of
it, I think.
I completely agree with that criticism. I think it's a worthwhile one to raise. I have a bit of a spicy take on the circle of confusion. I'm not sure if I've raised it before, but my thought on it is that if Sean hadn't been so committed to solving this problem or like putting forward his research in service of, you know, uh, emerging from the circle of confusion, we would actually end up with much better research outcomes.
Oh, interesting.
Because so I feel like the narratives that exist around the Harman target are at least somewhat related
I know where
to
you're going with
this
this.
problem. Yeah, and if this problem hadn't been top of mind, the data would probably have been analyzed in a little bit more of a, I don't know, less dogmatic way.
Yeah,
In a way that
broad
would-
sense instead of a single target sense.
exactly.
Yeah.
That's my spicy take.
Yeah, I mean, I don't agree with that given the actual text of the works from that period. Like, Sean has always been a fairly loud proponent of individualization of headphones and speakers. That is to say, accessibility, right? So like, I don't think that he's falling into, and I don't think that in the actual work he falls into this premise of, oh, we need to completely standardize headphones because then we can have a completely standardized thing where the authorial intent can be perfectly experienced.
But however, he has made such noises online. I don't know that exists in the work, but I have seen some commentary that would suggest this.
I mean, it's a matter of degrees, right? Like, it's sort of like saying, we say that there is, and we say this because we feel that there's a case in the research for it, a variation in human preference that comes from a number of different factors. And because of that, there's a variation in what's going to be the most preferred sound, like the most preferred frequency response. But that doesn't mean that there aren't a lot of things that we think are bad. I think that Sean takes the line of
Excuse me.
Gesundheit. I think Sean takes the line of what he feels is the most compelling argument against the generally extremely shitty state of headphone FR. Like,
Yeah,
because there are a lot of things which are simply mangling the music, right? Like there are the the AB 1266s of the world. There are the O Bravos of the world.
getting
There
getting
are
80% of the way there is service enough to the music that it's worth doing.
Yeah, and I think that he also is something of an originalist there, or someone who cares about the authorial intent of the artist. I don't. Like, for me, art is aesthetic. I prefer to appreciate it for the effect it has on me, regardless of the intentions. But I don't know. I think that it would be a mischaracterization of Sean to say that he is a hardliner on that, in the same way that
I
people
know
who
that
are
he's
like,
not a hardliner on
He's a
that, and
hardliner on very few, if
yeah,
any, things.
when you speak to
oh, I
him,
wouldn't
like
say that. I think he's quite a hardliner on the call for better sound quality. Like, something that I
yeah,
really
Oh well,
appreciate about
that's I
Sean is
think
that
something we're all
the
hardliners
A
platitude,
on.
little bit of a cop out.
like yeah,
well,
but like
no, I
when
mean,
when
no,
you
because
when you
the
talk
thing
to
Do you think
is,
Sean,
headphones should be bad?
no, because the thing is, that's more controversial than you were implying here. Because
it is true. He did call out. Well, when I posted that video about the Evento 300, he was like, yeah, like that whole thread that he basically commented about, like how they clearly didn't adhere to any science when they were making this, and
he is
this
willing
should
to
be called
say a
out.
lot of products and a lot of companies are doing very badly, and I do
Yeah,
think that that is actually, like, we're inured to that at this point, but like there are communities where saying this company that does 10 million plus a year selling headphones is
how
doing it wrong is a
right,
controversial statement.
right. However, uh, my contention there is still that this goes back to something I said in a recent stream as well, that one of the outcomes, one of the results, or one of the things that has occurred as a result of Sean's work is some of this more like the default treatment of the Harman research is the more dogmatic. We might even call this a straw man, right? Like, is that sort of like more dogmatic narrative
The default interpretation is misinterpretation.
is misinterpretation, and I do put that blame. I do put that at the feet of the way that not so much not the way the science is done, but basically
Isn't
the
all
the
interpretation misinterpretation?
I mean, sure,
Let's
but
not go there.
you get the point. You get the point, right? Like I do it's the same problem that you get with only the people within the ivory tower are enlightened enough to understand it. When everybody we can't blame everybody else for, not being able to get there, right? And we can't so in a sense it's like
I
if
do
they
worry that we condescend our audience. Like,
no,
shouldn't we
I
have
am
expectations
I
of
don't think we're
people?
talking about
no,
the
hold on.
audience here. We're
I'm
talking about
pointing
the
at
people that
the
aren't into headphones at all.
I'm being critical of the science for not communicating well enough to the audience, right? Like that and I feel like as part of that criticism, I would put the circle of confusion in that target, right? Like I would aim it at like, okay, it should have done a better job of communicating what's actually going on there, so we didn't end up with some of these dogmatic narratives. Obviously, hindsight is 2020, but I also lay the blame partly at the circle of confusion for why this emerged the way that it did, right? Even though I would agree with you, like that's not, you know, this very narrow-minded kind of like view of it is not what the intention was, nor what's actually going on in the data, nor what Sean would ever say, like
I
but
mean,
despite his efforts to demystify this himself, it still has propagated in this way.
I think that the circle of confusion is a response to the way that audiophiles historically have interacted with the concept of high-end audio. I mean, like, think about hi-fi, right? Like, the
I
term
hate
is
the term hi-fi.
fidelity,
I hate the
right?
term hi-fi. It bugs me. Sorry, it's
Uh,
an aside.
I think my
okay.
my take on the sort of circle of confusion stuff is that I think it did matter historically quite a bit more. Like, just anecdotally, a lot of the older stuff that you listen to is in some cases problematic to listen to on just modern good headphones for various reasons. Either that a lot of older stuff is mastered way brighter, in general, and that's likely a circle of confusion thing. But also just other effects even outside of FR, like just panning. Stuff nowadays is produced so that it sounds more okay on headphones, whereas previously, what do you mean headphone? Like you're listening on speakers. That's the only thing that they're caring about. And so there's absolutely been shifts in how music is produced, and a lot of that isn't necessarily the circle of confusion in that music is being evaluated with the gear that's changed, or the monitors that they're using are different, or the mics that they're using are different, but just the way in which people are listening to music is different, and the music has to accommodate that to a degree. So I think that the circle of confusion is a thing, but I actually don't feel that it's really an issue nowadays, and it almost can't be, purely because of the sheer massive volume of both production, recording, and listening equipment that is out there, and just there's almost so much noise and variance and such a massive market that it's not possible to have a consistent trend which would lead to a circle of confusion anymore.
Well, that's not necessarily the thing, though, because the circle of confusion describes a feedback loop that can exist at any scale, right? Like, if one particular company uses certain recordings to voice their loudspeakers or their headphones, like in their listening test, then that will create confusion for them, right?
Well,
That's the
okay.
concept.
Let me just see if I understand your critique, though, Blaine, of it, because I actually think that we're saying similar things. I'm laying the blame a little bit at a slightly different point in the chain. Like, I actually think
Can I
your critique
argue
is
with
better.
chat first, just for one
Sure, go ahead.
parenthetic?
Go ahead.
Jack said, "Would you look through at a painting through a filter, even affected the image in the slightest way?" At Blaine Lacrosse, if I felt that the filter made the painting look better, I would install it in the painting in my house.
However, we are all looking at the painting through a filter of space and time, which could be interpreted as cause and effect, because that's how we perceive the world. Fuck yeah! All right.
I actually do want Blaine to deeper explain the first thing he mentioned, which is that we don't have proof for
that's what I want to
us
get
unpacking
down on.
things this way, because I think I know what you mean about the inverse of the colorations, but chat might not.
So the theory here is, let's imagine that somebody masters on a loudspeaker that, just for a very crude example, has a 6 dB boost at 2K. Let's imagine it's the Grado of loudspeakers, or it's the Yamaha NS10. The theory of the circle of confusion is that would imply that the mastering or mixing or the selection of microphones, whatever it is, will in aggregate be the inverse of that, right? That they're going to say, this sounds timbrally wrong, ergo I am going to correct for it. That we have an internal reference that we're trying to select towards. And that as a result, any coloration that exists in any step of the chain, whether it's the microphone has a peak in the frequency response, the loudspeaker has a dip, whatever, that the next step in the chain will attempt to correct for that. The thing is, while that's intuitive, right? Like, that's an intuitive thing, that's not actually something we have strong empirical evidence for.
Now, do we have any empirical evidence against it?
Well, this is sort of okay. So this one gets us into a question of burden of proof. I'm a very strong proponent of the idea that those proposing an effect must be the ones who are servicing proof for it.
Yeah,
There
I'd
are
agree
a
with that for the most part.
few limited papers that have attempted to dissect this issue. They have found that there are apparent effects of, for example, loudspeakers in control rooms on the balance, like the overall level of energy at certain frequencies, but they were by far not complete. Like, they were very small samples, and the ones that did show an effect did not show an effect of proportionate magnitude between the issues of loudspeakers in rooms and the changes that they apparently introduced into recordings. We also don't even know if those are actually changes those introduced, or if that just reflects random variation, right?
Sure.
This is something that would be fairly annoying to test, and I understand why it isn't something that has been widely tested, but treating it as the case is it leads us to dangerous assumptions about how people interact with audio equipment, right?
Yeah, I agree. I think My issue that tends to arise when people discuss the circle of confusion is that it describes a level of prescriptivist mindset of the person making the music that just simply does not exist. Like, whether it's the musician themselves who, comes up with the song, goes to someone to record it, and then, tells this person, hey, make it sound good, or the mix engineer themselves. Like, the only expectation of the artist or the only hope of the artist is that you'll enjoy the music. And that is, as I think we would all agree, a very wide boundary of potential
Yeah.
sound signatures that can sit within that. Now, when you
So
get to the engineer, the person actually making it sound a way, that does narrow considerably, but it is still a possibility space that includes many different types of playback devices.
yeah, I mean that's the broad issue. I'm thinking right now of albums that I know different choices would have been. Ooh, Jesus, sorry. My my headphones just. I got a phone call and they went into my headphones. That's connected to two things. It's weird.
Hang on, that
Um,
happens.
no.
You know that these albums would be different.
Yes. So if they had,
You know.
if the if the artist had listened to the final mixes on less affected, let's say, less esoteric playback equipment, they would have requested different choices be made.
How do you
Um,
know this?
well, there are certain albums that uh, are well, it's an assumption. I don't know this, but the assumption is
So you
there.
assume.
Yes, it is there
He has
because
walked back.
everything else has been recorded much better and everything else doesn't sound like shit when you when you listen to it. And so it's like when there are outliers because they went to a different in this case I happen to know they went to a different recording studio that they don't normally go to. They used a different engineer for this, a different everything, and it wasn't that they were trying to achieve a different sound. It's just that the conditions were different. And it's those situations where that make me think like, the circle of confusion must have been at work here in some way. I don't know in what way, because as you point out, like Blaine, like you don't know what, like it could. The burden of proof is it's not necessarily an indication of proof here that it. But still, I have to imagine that like if they listened to it now, they would be like, "What the fuck was I thinking?" And on top of it, I also happen to know that this particular artist wants to remaster that album because they were not satisfied with it afterwards. So something happened in the production of that album that made it not what the artist intended. And
You
But
presume.
which artist? Like which
There's that as well.
artist are we
musician,
trying
yeah,
to?
I'm talking about the
No,
musician.
no,
But the musician
I know
is not the artist of
your
the
question.
album. The
Yeah,
mixing
I
and
get,
mastering engineers are the artists of the
yeah,
album.
for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah, yeah.
That the
Like
yeah,
whose
but
artist
so
intent
at
are
the
we
end of the
actually trying
day,
to target
at
as our baseline within the circle
right
of
at the
confusion
end of
that
the
we would
day,
standard
in
anything against?
right in
Right?
this scenario, the musician is unhappy, right?
As they often are.
Alleged.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I assume if they want to do it again, it's partly because they don't like the way that it ended up, or somebody's telling them, "Hey,
I think
this
that's a
isn't
fair
fair."
assumption. I think that's a
Yeah.
fair assumption. What I don't think is as fair is the fact that the circle of confusion is treated by a lot of people who do have reverence for the science and reverence for the Harmon work as kind of a problem that
Proven
even can
science.
be solved. Um, I don't
Well, it
really
is
think it's a
solvable. Oh,
well,
we
yes,
split on this one.
technically it is solvable, but it would take such a massive effort of standardization that would basically never realistically be adopted by either the consumers and their playback devices or the people making music, that I think it's more productive to focus on a different modality of headphone sound quality other than trying to close a circle of confusion that would take a massively coordinated effort.
So I disagree on this one, actually, and this is interesting. But I'm thinking about like standardization of home theaters and stuff, like theaters actually, theater targets.
Mhm.
Um, all you would really need is one big industry player, and that industry player's name is Apple, to have a mastered for Apple standard, which had requirements for the acoustics of studios and the playback equipment used during mixing and mastering. And you could very effectively close the circle of confusion for a large body of produced content. The thing
So,
is,
yes, but that is not at all relevant to, like,
hi-fi.
our world, really.
No, but I mean, something doesn't have to be
Well,
like,
if music broadly is being mastered towards what, standard Apple sets, doesn't really matter what it is, then the circle of confusion being closed still applies to people not using any Apple stuff.
The thing
yeah,
is, Apple isn't
doing that.
influencing most recordings. They're influencing a lot of the biggest recordings in the world. Like, already they're doing
I
that when it comes to
I
music
honestly
and
think that actually, if Apple did set a standard like that, it would quite quickly become widely enough adopted that things that deviated from it substantially, people would complain about. And it would, even if people weren't
And
explicitly doing it to obtain that mastered for Apple sticker or whatever,
everyone would
things
need
would.
to listen to Lorho Gang headphones.
I'm not sure that's the case. So the reason why I say that is because this already exists in Apple Spatial Audio, right? Like, there is already like a version of Atmos that Apple tries to get as
Yes.
many people as possible to publish content with, because it's a feature of their platform that they want to kind of get people into. And their actual headphones themselves.
I just have to
But
But
shout out Rob's
spatial
what
audio
comment
is
here.
so niche that it can't snowball in the same way. Whereas
well,
if like
Yeah,
everyone using
it will.
AirPods,
it's that, but it's also because Apple so badly wants as many things as possible to have that label. There are a few different kinds of Apple Spatial Audio under the hood.
Hmm.
So, like, even the standardization isn't really a standard,
it's the
because one,
XKCD
there's
standard
multiple different
thing.
types
Yeah.
of playback devices that are all, interact differently with the humans listening to them. But because not everyone is going to get the same spatial audio type of mix, or like have the same baseline, even so, like, a lot of the spatial audio we see is just differently mixed stereo content or upmixed stereo content. And then obviously some of it is, mixed in Atmos proper and, made for object-based audio playback from its inception. That's kind of why I think, like, the theater space is in particular probably the space where this would most likely occur. I just think studio engineers who are like making content for like musicians, like, making music, are generally a little bit more mushy and a little bit more I'm just going to do my thing my way, and less kind of
I mean, I kind of get the feeling though, like they have an idea in their heads of like what good is, and
absolutely.
they stick to it the same way that like
Yeah.
a film director or whatever, like they have their sort of vision of how to do things and what the right way to do things is. By the way, I just want to read Rob's comment. A portrait of the monkey as a young man.
While
Thanks,
we're
Rob.
reading comments,
If anybody
Azad
gets
said,
that.
yes, of course. Azad said, you guys are arguing this much about a circle of confusion. Just wait till you discover the rectangle of discombobulation.
Yeah.
Really good.
But I guess my point is that like you can have whoever's doing the engineering of a record do it to the way that they have conventionally found to be correct, and still end up with something that is not good for most people. And so just
Or you can
because
end up
someone
with
has
something that is good but in a different way
well
than another
but
type of good.
yeah, but this is where I want to actually get to. I want to get to Blaine's sort of point here, like the supervening or underlying or whatever point about like art. Like you want it to be art all the way down, right? Art at the eardrum all the way down, including.
Some
Does
people
this
do, yeah.
include the right? So you could say, uh, effectively, even if this record ends up sounding like shit for most people on most playback equipment, to me, I I really like the way that this ends up sounding, or it's my personal preference for this to have sounded like this, and has nothing to do with what the musician intended. It has nothing to do with the mix engineer intended. It has everything to do with what you want it to sound like. Is that where you're at with this, or is there any, like, do you give
Well,
any?
I don't think that's the ideal, but I think that's a lot of how people actually interact with and buy headphones.
Well, it's how they buy headphones, but I'm curious if you're like, I'm not saying I disagree with this from a headphone buying perspective either. I'm just curious if for you, Blaine, does it run all the way to, like, does a certain level of adherence to agreed upon good matter to you personally when it comes to
Well,
the
I
recording?
mean, it depends on the context, right? Like if I'm recommending something to someone, then yes. If I'm enjoying it for myself, then
Personally,
no, not at
then
all.
no. Okay, interesting.
Like, why would I care what other people think?
No, I'm more just thinking, like, so where even you can agree that it is, it is colored in some way, or it is like there's an affectation, right? um or a good example of this would be Metallica's Death Magnetic, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there are things that they did in that and with that recording that most of us would agree it's probably not the right choice, right?
I mean,
Like,
it just doesn't sound very good to me is my main complaint.
okay, but say you liked the music, right? You
I
know what I'm
mean,
talking about,
there
where
are
it's like
Metallica
hard.
songs I like, but I don't like Death Magnetic.
No, okay, but I'm talking about the recording specifically. It's like hard clipping throughout all of it, intentionally.
There are
Well, what
definitely people who like that, though.
there
Furthermore,
are,
I consider that Rick Rubin should be destroyed.
and but this, Griffin, this is my point. There are people who like that, and presumably there was an intention behind doing it that way, even though the rest of us would be like, well, but this just ruined this album. Like, I mean, maybe the music ruined the album, but like this makes it particularly unlistenable. Is there a certain level where we have to just say, like, okay, make better decisions? For the
Well, I mean,
benefit
you
of all.
can, but it is basically just saying, I don't like the way you've made your sauce. Like, we can say this
No, but
sucks
it's not
to
even.
me.
But this, okay, but this now, right now, this is sort of the inverse of our usual debates. In a way, what I'm saying is, like, it's not just that I don't like the way that you've made your sauce. The way you've made your sauce is wrong. Make your sauce better.
This is
Well,
a philosophy
I
stream
mean,
in
is there a
disguise.
substantive difference between I don't like the way you've done this and this is
Well,
wrong?
there
Like,
is, if we're talking about something like the Circle of Confusion and certain standards that you would want to have in place for.
that depends on if you're an emotivist or not.
Okay.
Well, I would say the circle of confusion is one of the less good kind of uh, underlying points you could base that argument of you did this wrong on.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, right? So, like,
Yeah.
if we have, and again, this is a little bit devil's advocate here, because I do agree with Blaine that, like, what really matters is how it sounds to me, and if I happen to like the hard clipping of Death Magnetic, I don't give a shit what anybody else thinks, right? But the point is more that, like, if we're talking about something like the Circle of Confusion that could realistically solve certain, it could raise the bar. Let's say if the Circle of Confusion, say everybody was using the same playback equipment, right, in these environments, theoretically, well, I have two thoughts on this. One is that I imagine that the bar could get raised for some of these recordings for everybody, but the second is, um, I actually think that this gives more license to the people involved in the making of the record. Like, it actually gives them more agency, because now there's not as many confounding variables for how their thing's going to end up sounding to people, right? Because at the end of the day, I have to imagine that whether we're talking about the musician or whether we're talking about the mix engineer, they are intending it to sound a certain way, right?
Yeah, I mean they already are doing that, and in many ways kind of the process of a lot of people is using reference recordings, so things that already sound good to them. And often they're recordings that are used by a lot of engineers, and a lot of how they either develop and find their style or just already have their style is by failing to hit those marks. And I, I think by assuming that we could close the circle of confusion by having a standard of like end sound quality for the artistic process um, doesn't really accurately reflect one the difference just in like on a wide scale like music genres, um, but even more so than that, like music arrangements within a genre can be quite
Yeah,
spectrally different
it's true.
based on something as simple as like their tempo.
Yeah.
What about the stuff where artists or engineers are doing stuff not because it's necessarily what they want to do from an artistic standpoint, but something that they feel that they have to do? I mean, the hard clipping thing, like clipping can actually be a tool to make something sound the way that you want, and often it is used that way. But also a lot of clipping is a result of loudness wars. You have to master something to be loud.
Hmm.
Yeah, we're gonna.
And
Sorry,
but
it's
even
just
with,
funny that like the loudness war is actually closer to closing the circle of confusion than it is to actually like
yeah,
because it
weirdly,
is what
but
a lot of
even
people are
with
aiming for. It's funny.
music arrangements and composition, like
Yeah.
nowadays you have to make music where in that first like 5 seconds it hooks you in immediately. You can't have slow build
Yeah.
up songs anymore, and they're not made anymore, not because artists don't want to or because that's not something which people like anymore, but because if you do that, objectively speaking, just with the way that people listen to music by clicking on Spotify or whatever, and next until something grabs their attention immediately, you can't do that anymore and you won't be
Yeah.
successful. So they feel that they have to make songs a certain way or mix songs a certain way in order to get people's attention. If your song is too quiet or it's not immediately catchy, artists deviate away from doing these things out of necessity in a way, even if their artistic intent or preference would be to do otherwise.
I have to just with regards to the clipping thing, I have to shout out Kenny. The solution is to find those people and correct them permanently.
The Headphone Show does not endorse Andrew Park's specific call
No,
to
it's
assassinate
Kenny's.
Rick Rubin.
It's Kenny's. Well, you just said that. But he also says my take is that if you fix the hard clipping, those that do like it wouldn't care, honestly. And I kind of agree.
Honestly, that's probably true.
It's probably
and it's kind
true.
of the same thing when it comes to bad headphone tunings. Like if you
Yeah.
made bad headphone, like people who traditionally make esoteric tunings like Abyss or whatever, if you made those headphones sound better, like I don't
The
think
people who buy them would still like them.
There's also debate and discussion around whose intent it is or who has rightful intentions. Like I don't know if you guys ever followed the case of I'm really sorry, I've got a complete mental block of his name, but one of the engineers that helped produce some of Michael Jackson's songs and sued the Michael Jackson estate because they released successive remasters, which he said made his music sound worse, and it was not what it should have been, basically. There was a guy, actually, audio reviewer or something, who was called in as an expert witness, and they had to talk about this. And you can see as each remaster got released, and it got louder and louder and more clipped, when they were trying to argue that no, it's exactly the same or it doesn't matter and whatever. And it's stuff like that where it's Quincy Jones.
Yeah.
Was it Quincy Jones?
Oh, my goat.
I can't remember now. But yeah, I mean that was an interesting case because it was an example of where, I mean, the artist is dead, so it wasn't him making the decision, and the mastering engineer was clearly unhappy with these decisions, but someone was making this decision to alter the songs in a certain way, it seems for loudness war reasons. Yeah, I guess comes back to that term of has the artist intended? And a lot of this, we're assuming that everything that comes out of what you're hearing in the song is what was intended either by the artist or by one of the engineers, when that's really not the case a lot of the time. Because they just don't care or put much time into it. They make a song and put it out, and that's great. They don't care about the production, or because either decisions are being made knowingly, which are detrimental in many ways, and the artist would prefer not to do them, but they kind of have to, or some exec somewhere is saying, no, make it louder because it sounds too quiet right now.
Yeah.
I don't care.
There is that question. I like that question of license or of like basically, sorry, of agency, just because there are examples where bands will come out with music that's like really well, like it feels like more of like a producer's album, right? Because it's like really high production value, whatever.
Yeah.
And then sometimes as a reaction to that, they're just like, I just want to make music. So they'll just put a microphone in a room and just play whatever they want. And they feel like that's actually a more authentic representation of what they're doing, what they want, and so for them they don't want it to sound like a producer's album. And as much as the listener, like, maybe people would prefer it to be a producer's album, but there is something to respect about that, I think,
A lot
Yeah.
of it for me comes back to, I mean, looking at the topic term, how much does accuracy matter? For me, like there are songs which I really like because of how just excellently produced and mixed and mastered and everything they are, and it sounds really impressive. But then there's also a lot of other songs where they don't sound real or even well done, but the way in which it's been done is really enjoyable. But then there's other stuff. I mean, if you go and listen to Imagine Dragons, for example, some of their old like albums and stuff,
Imagine Dragon
bloody
makes sense.
horrible. The production was terrible on them, and it's so far beyond what I could call artistic taste or whatever. In a similar way to, you can give some artistic license for headphones to have a little bit of a colored response and stuff, but then if it's got just a massive peak in the treble, that's not that goes beyond artistic taste for me and license, and is just this is just a flaw at this point.
Blaine, you had a thing.
Well, there was a comment by R0 in chat quite a while back, but I think that it, to me, highlights a misinterpretation of the circle of confusion. Like, I am here not to praise it, but to, to denounce it. But
You
he
have to steal,
said,
man.
yeah, if you were to hire 5 different pros to mix and master the same track in the same room using the same speakers, would their final results sound identical? If no, the circle of confusion isn't fixable. This is wrong. There is an artistic element to the production of music. The premise of the circle of confusion is not that all production should be the same. It is that all production should be using the same or calibrated to the same implements, so that the differences between things are intentional rather than accidental.
You should. That's exactly it. You should try to eliminate confounding variables if possible.
High levels of variance doesn't mean that there is no underlying trend. It's like, okay, blackjack. Take blackjack, for example. That's got very, very high variance because each hand you play, there's almost a 50-50 chance of winning or losing. But long term, you will lose because the house has about a 3% edge. In the same way that if you put in 4 or 5 mastering engineers on the same room, same equipment, same song, the results wouldn't be the same. But if you then repeated it, and this time the speakers all had 5 dB more bass, whilst the results are still going to differ, it at least seems intuitively that the end results would then be about 5 dB overall less bassy. And that's where the idea of the circle of confusion comes in. Variance doesn't mean that there's not an underlying trend. And to be clear, that's not me saying that the circle of confusion is real and that there is definitely an underlying trend. As Blaine said, there's not much data on it. But just to be clear, that just because things don't end up exactly the same, it doesn't mean that there is no trend there.
Just to, I think we should move on to the next topic. I do want to. There's a component to this topic that is about accuracy, and Blaine brought up something. I think it was Blaine brought up something about how, it is still like there's a traditional view of all of this in terms of like the question of fidelity. And we have beaten this horse a bit.
Beatings will continue until takes improve.
Yeah, I do think there's an element of like, wait, I'm not sure if you said exactly this or not, Blaine, but I tend to agree that like fidelity is not the thing that people should be chasing. It's actually just preference.
Well, the concept of fidelity is kind of epistemically troubled.
Yeah, it is. It is. Yeah, especially when we're dealing with stuff like this. Like it's.
Yeah, I mean, there's with a binaural recording, right? Like, imagine we have a spatial recording. You can say, okay, well, fidelity is as though I were there, right?
Yeah.
You can't do this with any multi-tracked recording, right? Like, which mic are you?
Yeah.
And presumably you probably don't actually want to be in the recording studio.
No.
But and we have like
going to be the best experience.
This is definitely one that we've done before. I still come back to the same thing about like, I feel like at a very base level, like on the if you go wide enough, people do want their trumpets to sound like trumpets. They want their guitars to sound like guitars. They want their voices to
You
sound
say this,
vocals.
but hard tuning is popular in
It's
vocals,
true.
and
It's true. It's true. So like maybe this is, but like this is like my like very like at a, you want things to be recognizable in some fashion. I feel like when people are listening to playback equipment that does a good job of not fucking this up, or as you would put it before, mangling the music, um, then that is generally preferable to people. But like I think there's a component of preference that's related to in their minds fidelity, right? Whether or not it actually tracks with fidelity might be a separate
Really
Well, I
old
think
cop's got a good point there, which is that no one wants to hear a trumpet the way a neutral mic hears a trumpet up close.
Yeah, it's basically
that's
what
fair.
Blaine just said. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and
But
one thing I think that is an important conclusion from Sean's work, and it's something that we don't mention enough, is that people consistently describe what they like as sounding neutral and accurate. Right? Like
Yeah,
that is
and
something that
yeah.
we find in the Harmon work, and which is mentioned in a couple of his conclusions, but which we don't poke at as much as we should, that people perceive a subjectively enjoyable sound as accurate.
yeah, to me, I struggle with squaring that because I know and it's not. I feel like it's not. It's in the speaker stuff as well as the headphone stuff, right? I feel
Yeah,
like.
yeah.
But anyway, I have trouble squaring that with what I take to be the most relevant outcomes from the Harmon work, as far as like the overall like the in practice of tunings for headphones. Like,
How do
um,
you mean?
Well,
well,
it's just telling you what people perceive. It's not like
I
these
I
people
know,
aren't
I
speaking
know.
to the actual
So right.
reality.
So to me, the outcomes there are uh generally that people like a proportional bass and treble, and that there's an agreement between people want more bass. Like they don't just want a flat response. They want a more bass, less treble, like a downward kind of bass to treble delta in some fashion, and it agrees with the speaker stuff. To me, those are like the kind of like foundational outcomes from that research. To then square that with well that earlier statement about like people find the uh what they like to be, is it people find what they like to be, they also perceive it as neutral and accurate, right? Does this, in my head I'm thinking of like there are all kinds of ways that I could achieve the bass to treble balance to make it proportional while also making it sound very not accurate and very not neutral for me, right?
Well,
um
so I will say something that we stylize the Harmon work, Lorho's work, etc., as the premise that a proportionate level of bass, boost, and treble cut is generally what people prefer relative to the
yeah,
condition of flat in-room sound power or flat
yeah,
DFH RTF for headphones. This does not mean that every way of doing this is equal,
yeah,
and probably the hypothesis that I would have based on that work is that some of them there are some of the ways of boosting or cutting, etc., are more preferable, and furthermore, those that are more preferable will be described as more neutral by people who are simply doing blind listening tests.
well, and as we kind of learned is like with the more recent stuff, um it's a bit determined by what people are subjected to, because they're not necessarily hit with the same starting point um for all of the research.
It also comes back to a little bit of the circle of confusion too, because some people making music are actually mixing their music on just flat in-room speakers,
Yeah,
so that some music like might just actually sound better on a flat
yep.
DF headphone or something like that.
Yeah. Something that I wish that we had gotten time to chew on a little more, and that I think people rightly bring up, but I don't think has direct pertinence, is the question of color calibration in video and images.
Mhm. I'm less interested in that, but I see why you would want to touch on it. Yeah.
Well, I want to engage with it. Like, I don't think that I don't think that it is pertinent, but I think that it seems pertinent, and so it's worth engaging with why
Mhm.
we don't find that pertinent for the case of audio, right? Because the idea seems sound, right? We calibrate monitors so that you will see the same thing that was intended in the final, in the edit. The problems, of course.
Well, is that really why? I think in large part we're considerate of the ways in which content is consumed, which is, for example, typically through the online, right? And
Mhm.
so it matters that basically you are working with a color space, for example, that's going to reasonably be interpretable as normal to people who are consuming content in that format. I think this is a slightly different thing if you're saying like visual fidelity on displays across the board, in any condition or any ideal scenario, right? So but the point there is mostly like, yeah, we're considering it for how it is mostly going to be consumed, and we're not able to we're not able to put people in the ideal condition, if that makes sense.
So Pibby Boy notes, and he was the one bringing it up earlier that made me think about this. Having display standards prevents confusion between different studios working on the same content. So from his point of view, it's a standardization in the professional space that allows Studio A,
Yeah,
Studio B, or
it's
Monitor
true.
A, Monitor B to be directly comparable, and that makes very much sense.
It's
The
true.
question is, does that have pertinence to end users?
I think
And
it. Go ahead.
my argument would be that all else equal, it actually encounters very much the same sort of problem, unless you can actually show that people prefer with stuff that is made
Yeah, I was
on calibrated stuff.
exactly right. I was just going to say this. So one common thing that happens with extended color space displays, if they don't have a proper sRGB clamp, or if they don't have any way of actually um, doing it in some custom manner, is you'll get really vivid and vibrant colors, but they'll be wrong. And the question that I know people who will see that and go, "This is a vivid and vibrant color." Never mind the fact that the red is actually pink, and
Yeah.
and they don't necessarily care. But it was the kind of thing where, like, when I was trying to, like, if you're consuming sRGB, consuming most content, let's just say, it's immediately recognizable and off-putting to the point where I'd never want that. Um, and it's the reason why. I mean, it does get a bit into weird territory now because people now have, for example, like HDR displays, and it's becoming a little bit more common. But for the longest time, it didn't make any sense to consider, like, for professional use, wide gamut displays, because nobody was consuming content that way. Or, like, not nobody, but you know what I mean. Like, most of the places that you'd be putting your content was like online, and so you know having it fit with having it look normal on most displays was what you wanted. But no, to your point, Blaine, like, I know lots of people who ended up buying those extended colored gamut displays because they would pop more, higher bit displays, even though the colors were totally fucked.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a question there of whether this reflects true preference, the preference that they would have if they were
They
simply
compared.
shown the
Yeah.
unprimed with a number of references or not.
Yeah. We,
Like,
we make this assumption, and it's a reasonable assumption to make, but we also don't know. Like, it's intuitive to me that people would prefer it if it looked more accurate, but I also don't know.
yeah, I mean, I think that that's sort of the same intuition that underpins the circle of confusion. And it also underpins things like Tool has specifically suggested that speakers should have flat on axis because that is uncolored, right? And that is just sort of an intuitive thing.
Mhm.
We don't really have any. It'd be wrong to say we don't have any evidence that that's preferred. We do not have strong evidence that that's preferable over other paradigms that have comparably regular directivity and similar in-room response. You can make arguments both ways from the limited data pool we have.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Anyway, shall we move on? What do people want headphones to be more? Sorry, why
Yeah,
do
why?
people want headphones to be more complicated than they are? Now, is this from an acoustic design perspective, or is it from a
This
like
one comes
mechanical?
from a community member by the name of Blake Lacrosse.
So I actually I
It's
have
Delacroix.
dude. Okay, the amount of
Blake Ross.
I completely agree with Blaine on this. that like, well, I don't know if you're making exactly this
Well,
point,
with
but I'm
the
going to make
implicit
it.
assumption this question makes,
Yeah.
you agree with that.
Yeah. Like, no, like, yeah, I know what you're saying, but like, so, well, I'm not sure Blaine's going to make this point, but the point I'm going to make here is, I agree with the premise that designers are deliberately shooting themselves in the foot. if
Awesome.
that's indeed the premise, because for the amount of overly complicated design that exists in headphones, it's like that doesn't need to be there. That's there because it looks elaborate, it feels elaborate or whatever, right? It usually it's some sort of visual design thing. Uh
Mm.
you think also mechanical or what?
Well, so I think this is one of those things that's kind of an onion. The original thing that prompted this was like, why do people want headphone science to be more complicated than it is?
Oh,
So like,
okay.
why are people
I'll be right back.
always looking for CSD for, oh, this is an unmeasurable parameter or whatever. But then the more I thought about it, this really applies to many levels of
Yeah.
headphones. Why do people want headphone drivers to be more complicated than they are? Oh, it's not just about breakup frequency and the frequency response and how much distortion it is. Beryllium imparts a different timbre of sound, or this one is,
Well, no, but I mean
lighter,
like
so it has more high frequency detail. And
that I
and
think
really it
is
almost
it's just in the believies of people, man. Like I think the to me at least the core here is that like there is it's almost like people are deliberately stacking the deck against themselves when it comes to certain design choices, such that they have to then they're also now looking like, for example, the most basic one would be, why do we choose ribbon drivers in headphones? Like, why is that a thing that people are doing at all?
is this I mean, I'm okay with flogging raw, but this seems like I'm not sure
Okay,
if
maybe
punching down, but it's a very niche
no, okay,
complaint.
but okay, that's like some okay, fine. Why do we choose? I'm just trying to think if there's another.
I
Okay,
mean,
let's pick
AMTs are
head
equally
AMT. Yeah,
apt.
AMT.
Yeah, I
Let's
mean,
pick
like,
that.
why do we use drivers that don't really have substantive advantages for headphones in
Exactly. That's
headphones?
exactly what I'm saying. Yeah. Why do we make these kinds of decisions? Uh, so the cynical person in me would say it's because it looks good on a box. There's something you can market around that people have a pretty easy, like they'll latch onto, attach themselves to as a mark of better, right? This is better because it does this thing. But I actually think, having met a lot of the folks in the industry who are committed to these, they
Yeah, they believe
genuinely
it.
are committed. They are genuinely like believers about whatever the technology is that they're putting into it. But I would go as far as to say that it's beyond just those types of choices. It's also in the actual like acoustic design of the products that get made. Like headphone design can be way simpler than it typically is, and it's often, to your point, Blaine, the desire for visual distinctness that overcomplicates the the end result.
I can see an argument for it for sure. I
I
think that generally, like, I asked this question with an answer in mind, interestingly. Um, yeah, it's
I
almost
bet you
like it's a
did.
leading question or
Yeah.
something. Like, I do think though that there is a real reason, and I think it's an understandable one for the people who are listening to stuff, and that includes people who listen to stuff and who also design stuff. And I really do think that people want complexity to exist beyond what we can demonstrate exists, because it's very difficult to reconcile our experiences of audio with the relative simplicity that the science shows in headphones and even speakers, right? Like, music seems like a multidimensional experience in a lot of ways, and the ways the differences in fairly simple measurements change our experience of music don't seem proportionate in their magnitude. But I really do feel like there's sort of a thing of people need the mechanism to be as complex as their perception of the experience. I don't know, that's
Yeah.
my
I think that's a good way of
That's a
putting
good
it.
framing.
I
I
I
go back to
think
Cameron's thing, which is that because the analysis is limited, it sort of prompts a lot of like looking for more. You know what I
well,
mean?
on that note, I think there's a little. I sort of have a bit of a two-tiered thought on this. I mean, the first
Yeah.
one being that actually, I think that Driver's story is less of a problematic thing. And also, I don't think it's necessarily fair to say that it's making things more complicated. Because I do think it's fair to say that there are trends in frequency response behavior between things like a beryllium driver versus an AMT versus a planar or dynamic, even just as basic as that. Just look at the base response. I think a lot of it is that, interpreting frequency response measurements is to some degree more difficult than going, is it a planar or is it a dynamic? And what are my experiences with both of those? I don't think that taking driver story as a little bit of a shortcut to kind of describe some of the trends in frequency response that do produce different results is necessarily a bad thing. And I also wouldn't describe it as making things more complicated. I think the bit where people start to make things more complicated is when they start to add on lots of other little stuff. I mean, in terms of like source gear stuff, I was having a conversation with someone who was, talking about why he's got his DAC, and then he's got a clock externally for that, and then he's got another DDC, and then he's got another clock feeding that DDC, but then he's also got a clock for the clock thing, and it's like, stop, because actually this is demonstrably making things worse. But the reason that you're doing this is because you spent money on it and you want it to be good. That's kind of what's happening.
It's the person with the
with headphones,
stack
you can.
DAPs and portable stuff. That image.
Oh, that one. Yeah, that one.
Yeah.
But
I would agree that like the desire for things to be more complicated chiefly comes from consumers, not so much.
I don't think it's
people
the
making
manufacturers that are
headphones.
doing this.
But
Like,
there are a few manufacturers that are very guilty of this.
I think there's a nuance with manufacturers, right? Like, again, like, let's talk about the folks who, and I know a number of these people who will say, a dome made out of biocellulose has different base than a dome that's made out of beryllium or whatever, even though objectively we can say that isn't something which can be directly related that way. Like, we know the physics there, and the physics say that the differences of those materials, assuming that MMS, FS, etc., are the same, are at high frequencies. And of course,
I think that doesn't disprove it, though, because I think, to be fair, a lot of the sort of the thing that people talk about with biocellulose being like punchier isn't just related to bass; it is also related to treble relative to bass. So I don't think that that's necessarily a fair thing to say is wrong. I think it's just that people aren't necessarily aware of how it ties into what the data does actually show. In the same way as, it's not that planars are inherently less punchy than a dynamic driver. It's just that typically there is a trend between planars having a flatter bass response and dynamic drivers having a slightly more rounded and a little bit more mid-bass focused response. And that's going to provide a difference in presentation. It's not that you can't make a planar or make a dynamic driver that has those other characteristics. It's not an inherent property of the driver, but it is fair to say that there are trends, and describing driver story is in some ways, valid shortcut to that. If people
but I know designers who select drivers on this basis, right?
Well,
like, that's the thing. There are people who treat these as inviolate traits of certain materials, certain elements of construction of headphones, and that does limit some of what they do, right?
I do think there's because there's a subjective component to this. I mean, for a lot of people, they're not considering necessarily the properties of the actual acoustic properties of the drivers. They're considering their experiences, and their experiences are of X and Y with given driver type. Thus, they end up chasing that dragon. And it's not for no reason. Like, well, I was just saying earlier, to you guys that there is a driver that I can get to measure extremely well, on a rig, that when I listen to it, it doesn't sound good to me. It sounds limited no matter what I do. And if somebody's having that experience, that's what they're going to index for, not necessarily what they can do with the acoustic performance of the driver when it's in its
I think so much of this comes from two things. One is what I touched on earlier about people quite frankly, to some degree, a lot of this, people making things more complicated, is because it's a very convenient way of justifying their preferences or experiences. Being able to say that, well, this headphone that I like is better because it's using this particular approach, and that's clearly better than everything else. And it's very hard to, in many cases, disprove that by the simple nature that if you throw enough specific esoteric things as criteria, it's only ever going to apply to one product. So you don't have even a sample size of 2 to start evaluating whether what you're saying is real or not.
The most detailed headphones in the world are beryllium designs with M-shaped drivers, which have an acoustically open rear volume and a flexible surround.
So this kind of stuff. But then there's also just the fact that some of it I think does come down to just an inherent difficulty with interpreting the data that we do have, like saying what is detail in a headphone, well, or what is soundstage in a headphone. And we know that this stuff is shown in the frequency response. It's just that we don't have a good way to look at a frequency response and say this one will be bigger than this one, or this one will be more detailed than this one. And so people feel compelled to look for other stuff and make the error of saying that it's not to do with frequency response, rather than saying we don't have a perfect understanding of how to interpret this yet. When people don't have a perfect easy answer, they'll seek something which they can use as a perfect easy answer, which is also quite hard to disprove. And so that sits very nicely, intentionally or unintentionally, as something that they can hold on to until something better comes along.
I think you're largely correct. I do think part of this stems from the fact that people's bar for like good is actually like very low. Like a headphone being good is fairly easy.
Community skill issue.
But I think for a lot of people, they don't know how to even analyze a headphone in terms of the difference between good and great.
Yep.
Like I think to a lot of people, it's just a simple pass fail and that's it. And when it comes to like what can make a headphone great, a lot of what stands out to a person as making a headphone great is complexity, or the idea of a headphone doing something unique or whatever. Both to justify it being great, as well as you said, justify their purchase, justify the price, whatever. When the analysis is as lacking as it is, and people are so in the dark about what would even be actually ideal for them, they're not going to have many many things to actually latch onto in terms of meaningful analysis of the things that are like really great. So
I just want to quickly mention
on marketing and stuff like that makes sense.
Jack in chat saying, so do materials not make a difference? Well, no, they do. It's just that people often attribute some aspect of the sound of a headphone to the material in a way that cannot be described by the measurements or frequency response, when that's not true.
Yeah,
it's not that the materials don't make a difference. They do. As said, just looking at the very basic difference between
they make a measurable difference
and a dynamic driver, there's a clear measurable trend in difference in the base.
To be fair, that's not a material difference. You can make those from the same thing. But so the claim here is a hammer made out of aluminum and a hammer made out of steel can both dome you, right? Like, the question is, what are you trying to achieve? There are cases where the steel hammer is going to behave differently if you're getting to the limit where the aluminum hammer will start to plastically deform, right? But if you're using it to bash someone's brains in, they're both going to bash their brains in. So the question is,
I'm a little confused by that.
I don't know if this analogy quite works. Like, no, what Cameron's saying, I think, is correct. It's the material has an influence on what is going on with the sound, but that doesn't mean that you can't achieve that whatever that is in different ways that don't. So the material is not a requirement.
Or conversely, that what is happening is necessarily a product of the material.
Of the material, like, there's other ways to achieve the thing that you're trying to achieve. The material is just one part of that.
Well, it's like
one potential part of that.
The headphone, the Austrian Audio Composer, that sounds a lot more similar to many planars to me than it does to many dynamic drivers. And if you look at the measurements, it measures much more like many planars. The bass response is much, much flatter. It doesn't have that sort of rounded shape to it that many or most dynamic driver headphones do.
Doesn't have the
bass. It's not that it's actually a planar in secret. It's a dynamic driver headphone, but that sound isn't inherent to it being a planar or it being a dynamic. It's just that the way that you construct and design a headphone is going to have an influence, obviously, on what the result is, but it's not that you cannot achieve either result with a different approach, or that bass, planar bass is something that exists outside of frequency response, because it doesn't.
Well, but the planar bass was there was a meme around planar bass at a
Planar
time.
based can mean a lot of things,
Yeah.
which is a separate
It was a
problem.
signal of quality at a certain point in time that is no longer relevant today
Well,
because
or of anti-quality. I've heard people
oh,
complain
sure.
ardently that planar
Yeah.
based is.
Yeah.
But
But
so
yeah.
the one thing I do want to just sort of, and I know I've said this twice, but I just want to reemphasize this because it hasn't been engaged with as much. There are traits that exist in headphones with certain technologies which have no relation to those technologies. Like we have rightly emphasized that you can achieve.
Thanks, Blaine. We'll see you later.
Nice.
This is the perfect
It's just, damn, he's really gone. Did it crash again?
Yeah, it must have crashed for him.
Oh, he's still in the chat room.
Oh, it's
Oh,
hilarious.
now he's
to me.
gone.
Yeah. But I think so. We'll get back to this. But in my mind, it's a matter of necessary and sufficient conditions, as usual,
everything is for
as
you.
everything is. Well, no, it makes sense, right? It's like
I
it's
mean,
like a yeah. Yeah, we don't need to beat that horse. The overcomplicatedness of headphones, I think. I mean, to me, I was answering this question a little bit differently in terms of like headphone design, because that's where my brain's going these days. But
Oh,
the
okay.
amount of headphones that I've taken apart, where I just think to myself, like, none of this needed to be even remotely as elaborate. It was just done so that it looks cool, you know.
I mean,
And
that's valid though. Like
I mean,
making
it
something
is.
more complicated for aesthetic and comfort reasons is fine.
No, but
And
oftentimes making it more like intricate or elaborate in the aesthetic sense makes it way worse acoustically and
yeah,
creates
that's fine.
creates challenges that they didn't need to deal with if they had just done it more simply, right? So that's when I say, like, oftentimes designers are shooting themselves in the foot. Yes, sometimes with respect to driver choices, but it also extends to the design of the product itself, like the rest of the headphones design. You have these I mean, actually, I think a good example is well, I was going to say a good example is those focals. Um, they have a very elaborate design to them. Like, they're actually, from an industrial design perspective, they're incredible.
which vocals?
The ones you're wearing.
Oh, the Azuris and Oddities?
Yeah. But say they at one of the elaborate things about them is the yoke structure and the yoke system, right? I mean, that's something where, like, it looks like sleek and elegant, but actually there's a lot of complication to it. It's not symmetrical in any way, which is like a really cool design thing. But if you notice the way that they move, they can theoretically sit in any orientation on your head, like this, like this, like this, like this, right? Like tilted slightly differently, and the sound is massively different depending on all of that. Whereas if it had been designed more simply, I can imagine a lot more of a uniform placement on the head across different heads, where this would be less of a problem, for
It's an
example.
interesting, yeah.
But that's like a fairly basic example. Another example is there was I ended up taking apart
Andrew, let Blaine back in.
Oh, oops.
I guess because the question was, why do people want headphones to be more complicated than they are? And I don't think
Hello.
I see much discussion about that around the sort of ergonomics necessarily, other than if something is just outright uncomfortable and people are saying you should have done a better job on this.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't really see people going like, oh, it should be built different. Actually, okay, no, I've just thought of an opposite to that. The Susvara. I see a lot of people complaining about the build on the Susvara for being too simple, but it's really comfy and it works. So that's maybe a bit of a counterpoint to that. But I think the question was, I'm more thinking of the people talking about the sound and trying to basically come up with explanations of their experience for driver story or things that you can't measure and this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think a big part of the why people want things to be more complicated is because of just divergent experiences, and they want to believe that there's something that neither they nor the person they're disagreeing with understand about sound, so that they are both on equal footing of misunderstanding, and no one's the loser in the exchange, I guess. Because, like,
Well,
both of us being equally wrong is better than
Some people don't
you
want that.
saying
Some
my
people want you to
headphones
be wrong
sucks.
because you're not aware of this thing, which is clearly correct, even though there's literally no evidence for it whatsoever. But yeah,
That's just a lower level of the copium
yeah.
spiral.
Yes. There are many
I mean,
levels to that spiral, though.
this does just to get back to the core of it, which is misunderstanding what's actually going on and therefore looking for alternatives because you're trying to just lose Blaine again.
No, I'm still alive,
Oh,
I think.
okay. Yeah. But no, like it's the one that I see the most is usually repudiation of the graphs of frequency response because it doesn't match people's experiences. I was thinking about this actually, like I have yet to come across a single person's commentary that repudiates the graphs or rejects the graphs as like I graph sniffers be damned, etc., where those people demonstrate that they actually understand what they're looking at.
Yeah.
So you're saying
Which-
skill issue.
100% skill issue.
What's
But like
interesting is
it's a
that
collective community
myths
skill
about
issue.
measurements video.
It's a
If you
collective
guys
community
haven't
skill
already.
issue, right? And it's like you can't even begin to have the conversation about how frequency response actually does describe your experience, but the graph doesn't necessarily do that, and the reasons why, because they've already rejected
Well, yeah,
they've already rejected the possibility that it
that's
describes something other than just tonality.
that's the thing, though. They've, like you saying, already, it has already happened, and for a lot of people who are like vocal online about this doesn't describe my experience, made that decision
And
years
that's it.
ago.
Years ago, yeah.
Years
Yeah.
ago,
Yeah.
and
And like
haven't engaged with like
Yeah.
any of the content over the last 3 to 5 years,
Yeah.
during which time there has been, in my
And
opinion, meaningful improvement in how we interpret frequency response
And
measurements.
I've gone
some
from
of that
there.
is the fault of people putting out measurements, like, because part of the issue is that there are some sources that are a lot more, I would say, militant about what the measurements are showing and how it relates to people's perception in ways that are not accurate. I mean,
Yeah, Mark Ryan.
Go and watch. Go watch the Myth About Measurements video.
That was
what I'm
really
up to.
funny.
Not seen it yet.
To be
But,
clear,
like-
Blaine is joking. Mark does
Yeah.
not do that.
But like there's been times where ASR, for example, was quite militant about how that measured response relates to what you're going to hear and not being willing to accept the differences that might exist between your own head and that rig, or you just variances between preference
Oh my God.
versus the Harmon curve and this kind of stuff.
Yeah, the
So
amount
people
of
have been
like
told you are
Yeah.
wrong
yeah.
because of what you thought about that headphone. Here I have a graph to prove it. When that immediately just puts them off. So it's understandable why a lot of them have gone, well, I'm out. I don't want to look at this graph stuff. It's
Yeah.
clearly not helpful for
A
me.
lot of the pushback is just graph sniffers being cringe online.
Yes,
It must
like,
be
this
said.
is not,
This is
this is
true.
not a problem on one side or the other. It's a both. And so the
Yeah.
people in the middle are going, hey guys, can we chill and talk about this? Because there's some interesting stuff, but everyone's kind of stuck in
Guys,
their own
Cameron is
corner of
trying to be
needing talk.
neutral on a moving train. I'm calling Noam Chomsky.
Jesus
He's a
Christ.
fence sitter.
No, but like he's not a fence sitter. It's I like the whole like objectivist subjectivist thing and people in the middle. No, like I would say all of us are. I know you hate that, Blaine, but all of us are objectivists. We're just the as you put it, the
Yeah,
atheists.
I think it's just the term
No,
objectivist
heretics,
has been misused.
heretics.
Yeah.
No,
I mean,
but
really, the thing is, what is it to be an objectivist, right? Is it to believe that what can be heard can be measured and that perception can be
Yeah.
quantified? Yeah, I think that
Yeah.
almost everyone
Okay.
agrees.
we have
I
a
wanna address
positive
this
relationship with
sensitive
reality.
Because I
You wanna
really
address
don't
what?
like. I want to address this fence sitter thing because I really don't like sort of the term fence sitter, because my point isn't that like I'm trying to sort of sit in the middle. The point is that I think the most objective way to go about this is to say, what do we actually know and what do we definitely not know? And we know that the Harmon curve does not describe absolute perfection for every single listener, for instance. And we
Yeah.
know that headphones vary from head to head. This isn't me saying like, well, maybe no, this is a fact.
Well,
it's not me sitting on the
But
fence.
have you
it's that some
considered
people
that
are
we're paid by big
being-
headphones to make apologies for bad
okay,
headphones?
but here's the
No,
thing. Here's the thing. Even in the some of the things that we were talking about, like a long time before, we got into all kinds of squabbles on ASR about, right? With various different folks. And then Sean's subsequent
Mostly the same
research,
folks.
mostly the same folks, but then Sean's subsequent research kind of validated like a lot of the stuff that we were saying, right? Like the I'm thinking of the IEM stuff, the most recent stuff that came up, right?
I mean, the
Where
fact
he
that he
himself
adopted the 5128 at
and
all
that
I
and it's like, and to me it was like, we're not going to get an apology from these people. There's no scenario where that
well,
happens. But they have also now started using the same tools. I see it now in all kinds of places. The 5128's DF is being used, right?
so I will say it would probably be an overreach to say that I mean, it depends on what specific claims, right? What Sean found is that in his listening tests, there were multiple curves that were quite different in FR that were equally or similarly preferred.
Yeah.
And
Which is
that's not novel to those. That was
no,
also
but it
his
is
earlier
core
work.
to what we were saying at the very beginning, that there are multiple different ways of achieving a proportional base to treble delta, and there might be similar ways to prefer. Harmon is one of them. That was so, like, the criticism that I saw on that was, well, if the color of the particular product wasn't red, you would not have had this perception. I was talking about, like, I think I was talking about the media or something like that. And like they genuinely were accusing me of being biased because of the color of the product.
base.
I mean,
And
red ones go faster.
And I was like, I can't. Okay, like at this point, I can't even have this conversation anymore.
There's a difference between being a fence sitter and being extreme on either side. If you think that like one measurement exactly describes the exact result that everyone's going to get on their head, you are factually incorrect. If you think that measurements can't tell you how a headphone sounds and that there's things which, you know, are immeasurable and outside of it, you are factually incorrect. I'm not sitting on the fence trying to decide which way to go. No, I'm saying that the people who are staying either side of it really far are both equally wrong, just in different ways. I'm very firm in my position. It's just not on either extreme.
So you're a radical.
Yes.
Everyone is wrong.
Radical centrist.
No, he's an enlightened centrist. Post Cameron to r/enlightened centrism.
No,
now,
but like,
please.
it's not just me. Like the whole
radical
the
fensist.
point is that I think our approach is very objective. Is the word I want to use, but then people think
I would agree.
Going wrong one way. I could go on about this for ages. Sorry,
Cameron is a horseshoe centrist, where he's
like,
split the plot into 3 dimensions and is now at a different center parallel to the center.
The thing is, though, when people, the problem with all of it, though, is like if you position yourself as being in the middle, people will think that you are approaching this in the tonal technical dichotomy kind of way, which is the most common way that, you know, the folks on Discord and the folks who use Squiglink and the folks who are reviewing things, they'll do this in, well, here's the measurable tonal stuff and here's the magical stuff that is at my.
I think that's probably why, like, as a discursive tool, that dichotomy was so successful. Was because it did kind of imply
that dichotomy
reasonable
is great.
centrism.
Yeah,
non-overlapping magisteria.
Yeah, but the problem is, just like with regular dualism, once you push on it, fucking metaphysics dies. All you're left with is epistemology, and and dualism goes away.
I mean, this question though, you can almost look it on its head. Maybe the reason why people are wanting headphones to be more complicated than they are and seeking out these kind of esoteric reasoning paths is because they don't understand how complicated headphones actually are. Yeah, and all these nuances about why our experience is different and why people can't agree on them. Maybe the reason that people
that was my initial argument,
because they don't realize the real ways in which they are actually really complicated.
Yeah. I will say
the thing is,
I just want to say the tonal technical dichotomy thing, if it's framed differently, makes sense. If you just say measured and subjective.
Yeah. But that's not how they mean it.
It's not how they mean it, and that's unfortunate. That's where the problem lies.
No, I mean, this is just sane washing. You're just like, okay, well, if you use
I'm not saying
an entirely different way.
No, I'm steel manning. I mean, like, you could call it sane washing. I'm steel man.
No. Steel manning is taking the strongest case for their actual position. What you're doing is
Do you
inventing
think
a new
Crin's actual
position that fits
position?
into their dichotomy.
Do you
That
think no,
that
no,
none of them actually use.
no, no? And in that
Yes.
sense, I agree. But do you think that Critical's actual position is that there is a magical thing about drivers that's not being measured, or does he? I feel like he said that he does think it's frequency response. At the end of the day, he's just he's going to go
I
the
don't know that
pseudoscience
he
route
thinks
because
it's a
We should-
magical thing. I think he's skeptical of our ability to measure frequency response accurately enough to describe the events that are like transpiring acoustically.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah. But
You
doesn't
could
he
Which is
just think
fair.
it's
I mean, I would
frequency
agree. I would agree with that.
Yeah.
we should have him back on and cause some problems again because Griffin was very mean to him on Discord and made him
Oh.
sad.
Oh,
You can
Griffin, why
accept
you
the
gotta do that?
What does that mean
limitations
to
of
him on Discord?
interpretation without
He
saying that
Sad
the
when we were
data
talking
must be
about his
incorrect.
graph site.
What Crins?
Yeah.
Grit. Listener
what
throwing
happened?
shade at Critical online. New
Oh
drama.
no. He's what I was saying what we say on this site all the time about Squiglink, which is that
No. Well,
it has
yeah,
led
you
to
hurt
a
his
lot of bad
feelings.
data interpretation
we have
because of its limitations.
Mark Ryan in chat. Mark Ryan, how do you feel about the tonal technical dichotomy? Do you think that frequency response describes more than just tonality?
Tell me about how the technicalities of the ZMF bokeh change based on its position relative to the ear hole.
I'm gonna go make another coffee. I'll be right back.
As much as Griffin hates it when we get into philosophy, this really is just like the old dualism debate thing that eventually went away.
I mean, that classic dualism debate that everyone's familiar with.
Okay,
I advocated for us doing a whole thing about our headphones art. All right, I think it's clear I'm
Yeah.
fine with philosophy. I'm just not fine with cringe, and you make it cringe.
This
Andrew.
isn't cringe. This isn't cringe. This is literally okay.
This is a little cringe.
What? Total technical dichotomy is dualism?
Dualism, dealing with the concept of dualism is a little cringe. Metaphysics is cringe.
It is. That's my point. We don't do
but
metaphysics anymore because it went away because extension won. All right, let's be real. We're all physicalists here, right?
I'm a solipsist, actually.
You're not, and also
You definitely are not.
Prove that I'm not.
Anyway, point being,
Based, actually. Okay, never mind.
Technicalities goes away when you properly understand FR at the eardrum.
So no, it's not that they don't go away. Like they're just not.
Sorry. Technicalities
thing
as
that
interpreted
is
the way.
separate. Yeah,
technicalities as interpreted by the way the community interprets it goes away when you understand FR at the eardrum. And I don't think that that's like, this is again assuming all else equal, and this is not exhaustively true. This is conjecture.
Mark did answer, by the way, and it's roughly the answer I expected.
I think FR is our best way to explain technicalities, and I'm also happy to use the word technicality to explain what I hear. Is that an answer? That's the way Griffin does it, and I actually I'm of mixed opinions on this, because on the one hand, I also use it this way, and the only reason that I use it this way is because that's what the community has. That's the
if
language.
a word
The
exists
shared
in the
language.
lexicon, use it because people will understand it.
But it's actually just me trying to meet the community like halfway. Like if I had with you guys, I wouldn't typically use that kind of language. I mean, unless it was like tongue in cheek or something, or I had like a meme reason to use it.
Yeah.
But like there is a sense, like I wish we could move to that place, Griffin, where you and what Mark has said here as well, where we are talking about these technical qualities, the subjective effects in terms of their FR relationships. As soon as you start doing that, though, people people will get confused.
There's two problems.
People will think that you're talking about it as this other, non-measurable thing, right?
So that's what's
There's
interesting
also
about my written reviews. Basically follow a format where like I'll do all the build, comfort, accessory stuff, and then I'll talk about the sound in the way I actually perceive it. And the way I do that is by hearing it. I unpack it through its FR and how the FR affects everything I hear about the music. And then my subjective sound sections is literally just, I'm going to reframe the thing I wrote above for the people who don't understand or don't want to read what I wrote above, because they're just skipping to the technicalities section.
Yeah, that's the most annoying thing. And
It
and
is. Yeah. Yeah.
what
I deeply wish I didn't have to write that section for the
the
people who
amount
will
of times
complain if
people
I
ask
don't
me,
use the special
yeah,
audio file
yeah,
words.
it,
But
it-
but if I didn't use those words, they legitimately wouldn't understand what I'm saying. So
some people might, that's true, and so
there
it's
is
an exercise in
utility in it,
communication, yeah.
and it
But
needs to
here's the question though:
exist
are
to an extent.
are we perpetuating the big lie by continuing to use this language because we don't have the opportunity to explain to them, usually at least, to right the wrong?
I think in
I think it's inaccurate
isolation
to
that's
describe it as a
possible.
lie.
Yes. Sorry, what?
I think it's inaccurate to describe it as a lie. I think we talked about this before, but some of these terms are
No, hold on, Cameron. The way we're using it is not as a lie. We're talking about the effect of FR relationships. However, the way people understand it is
right.
perpetuating, something that is just not true.
I mean, that effect is going to happen, and it's somewhat unavoidable, which is bad. And I wish there was a good way to resolve that. I don't think currently there is, but I also think that, as Griff said, if you didn't use some of these terms, the reviews themselves would hold much less utility because people genuinely wouldn't understand what you're trying to describe. So I don't think that not using them at all is a better approach. But whilst I do think that people will misunderstand that some of the things that we're describing exist outside of frequency response and it's some other unmeasurable thing or whatever, I think that it's still something that's useful to have. But it would be good to try and explain
Yeah,
more clearly that it is represented in the data. But again, just our interpretation is limited at present.
there are those who would say that at the end of the day, it doesn't actually matter because you are having that experience. The effect is real, and that's all that matters. And I don't really have anything. I don't really have a
Yeah,
problem with that. Like,
I don't disagree with
it's
that.
it's more that like the discourse is worsened as a result of this
So
inability to comprehend.
I would say, just to answer your original question, are we kind of further poisoning the well, or
Mm.
continuing the
Poisoning the well is
error?
a slightly different
No,
thing,
no, I
though.
know, but what you mean is that are we not doing enough to put the toothpaste back in the tube
Yeah,
by continuing to use that language? I would say there are probably no other reviewers as well known for questioning this aspect of reviews than
that's true.
us, Mark, and probably ASR.
Yeah, but like
Um,
when I watch Mark's reviews, and shout out to Mark's reviews, they're great. He doesn't care. He's just you know what I mean? It's just like this is what it sounds like to me, and it's good. It does the thing or it doesn't do the thing, right? Like,
yeah.
and there's a parsimony in that I appreciate as a viewer because I get a sense of how you know what the subjective effect is, you know, and whereas like if I, when I watch my reviews, I said this before, but like I when when I watch my reviews, I always feel like an asshole because I know what the people want. They want that. They want
Mhm,
this. What's the technicality rating out of 10, right?
mhm.
And I feel I struggle to give them that. And yeah, like maybe there is no downside to doing this.
I mean, I'm not gonna say there's no downside. I would just say it's probably outweighed in the discourse by the skepticism we, on average, contribute to the discussion, I think. Um,
Oh,
I
well,
did have
Mark
something
says,
else
is
to
it
say.
is it different than arguing sharpness in a photo doesn't exist? It's just color and contrast. I think it's less useful. It's a less useful way to describe photography. Um, yeah, but there's an additional implication there, which is to say that there is talking about the sharpness of the photo um, as a separate entity from the measurable things because people are dismissing the measurements. That's the problem, right? Because people are basically limiting the scope of what measurements describe to just tonality. That's really where the issue is. I don't have a problem with people talking about the effect. I have a problem with people basically saying I don't care about I don't care about the frequency response. I just care about what the technicalities are. It's the same. It would be the same in photography as I don't give a fuck about what the anything to do with the rest of the lens. I only care about sharpness. Is it sharp? And these people are idiots.
Andrew
Did I miss
Giovanni, I think,
something?
has a
Who are
good
we calling
framing.
idiots now?
Oh, people who only care about sharpness in lenses.
Andrew Giovanni
Okay, but
says,
what is the metaphor here? Like,
oh,
who are we
God.
calling out in audio?
Oh, just the people who say I don't care at all about frequency response. Just give me a 1 out of 10 on technicalities.
Andrew Giovanni says, I think if you play with EQ enough, you start to learn how FR affects different effects, such as soundstage, but people have to actively experience that for themselves, I think. And I think the point we kind of discussed earlier is that most people who are entrenched in this viewpoint are just not going to do this.
Oh, this is the
and they're probably never going to engage with content that does it for them, even if such content did exist.
I do also want to note, we don't have anything resembling robust testing of the correlation of FR and these subjective factors. Like,
it's true. It's true. And we're not saying this is exhaustively true. This is actually still very much conjecture. It's well-founded conjecture, but there could be other things like acoustic impedance, for example, that is having effect on the experience people are having.
Well, and having an effect on the FR. But I think it's
Axel Grell. Yeah.
Grell is actually, to my understanding, running a study that's a follow-on from something done by one of the Danish or the Deutsche Technical Universität or whatever it is.
Technische Universität Berlin.
Yeah.
But
they found that with constant FR for a given definition of constant, there was a correlation between acoustic openness and perception of sound.
Yeah. Let's get into spicy hour while we're.
Hold on, I wanted to say one more. I wanted to say one more thing. When it comes to, I'm just going to move the label to spicy hour anyway. But I'm not sure that the goal should even be us being able to codify or agree on a certain single signature that results in a shared impression across listeners in blind testing of dynamics or soundstage. I think what's more important is to educate people on how, because it's almost certain that no one type of coloration would be responsible for these types of things, that it could be any type of coloration. I think it's more prudent to educate people on how the different regions affect each other and how they could possibly contribute to an impression, and give examples of multiple different types of dynamics or stage or whatever. Spicy hour, or spicy however long Andrew wants to go before stopping us. Spicy half an hour.
Yeah.
Dev says, the current understanding of perception of FR is analogous to early thermodynamics. It can tell you roughly what will happen, not why. Do not look up what happened to the pioneers of thermodynamics.
Were they? Now I want to know. Blaine's looking it up for us.
Never tell Blaine to do something.
I'm trying to think of what pioneer of thermodynamics really got fucked up though, because Carnot was fine, right? Like, did anything bad happen to him?
Jada says, also, graph sniffers don't watch or read YouTube reviews. They EQ.
So I want to.
That's true.
I want to poke at the it can tell you roughly what will happen, not why thing. FR can tell you what will happen, not why. I don't know that FR can tell you what will happen at your FR. Like, because if you're talking about like the measured response on a rig, it tells you what does happen in that condition. But I'm sort of confused about like the why. What is the function of the why here? Cameron is looking intently at the screen.
Sorry, I'm simultaneously arguing with someone on Headphone.
Excellent. Fun. Rob Hawk should share what he's smoking.
Yeah, I kind of like to know as well, to be honest. Need to
Nah,
get
that man's
some
not smoking anything. That man just has a perfect
It's
brain.
pure. Yeah.
high on life.
Yep. Porta-Pro drivers are more capable than KSC 75 drivers because you can gain back the KSC 75 treble with thicker Yaxi pads and drilling holes in the grill, but you have no way to increase KSC 75 bass without distortion. If you put it on a headband, it
What if you
gains
put it
that
into an
distortion.
enclosure?
Yeah,
Just
you could
Yeah, I mean, really, just
coupling
change the
gain that
acoustic
bass.
coupling to the
Yeah.
ear is the
Yeah.
salient point here.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Dev has clarified. Sorry. The perception of FR requires better understanding of how neuropsychological effects. Let's just say, should we say psychoacoustics? Impart
Yeah.
perception of sound.
Well, psychoacoustics would technically be different, but
That's why I'm wondering. I'm
I'm
parsing it
more
that way.
interested in what happens to the early pioneers of thermodynamics. Who were you talking about, man? What happened to
You'll
them?
never find out. That's how thoroughly they were disappeared.
All right.
It's like giving me flashbacks to the opening of Now It Falls to Us to Study Statistical Mechanics. My favorite opening to any textbook ever.
Yeah.
Ludwig Boltzmann, who spent most of his life studying statistical mechanics, died in 1906 by his own hand. Paul Ehrenfast, carrying the same work, died similarly in 1933. Now it is our turn to study statistical mechanics.
Did you just read it as mechanics?
I said mechanics, at least I thought
okay.
I did.
I heard mechanics.
I heard mechanics too.
Yeah.
Yeah, statistical mechanics.
Yeah, fun. No, Dev, to me, what you just described there is still the what, right?
I mean,
Or
like
the what or how, as you put it there.
I don't think we
understand.
need to know much about brain action to correlate. Okay, so yeah, he's just saying that because Boltzmann, Ehrenfest, and others killed themselves, thermodynamics makes you kill yourself.
So does audio.
Did Meyer kill himself?
All right.
Spicy take
Graph
6xx's peak. It's the coldest take, dude.
Just EQ out the distortion. All right, please. Someone saying, please take a look at the Head 5 post comparing stacks Omega 1, 2, 3, and 4. It talks about pulling and contorting different faces to
Face,
best
what?
complement the what?
Listen to it going. You get a better seal if you fill that gap with a paddock.
I guess.
Online audio communities are cesspools for circle of confusion. I think that we can probably. Well, I don't know if circle of confusion, but just confusion.
Yeah.
It's its own. Yeah.
So the pentagon of discombobulation or whatever it was.
Really old Cobb says, "Is this? I guess if the HD6XX had infinite headroom at all frequencies, could you make it sound as wide as other headphones?"
I think he's meaning if you could EQ it without having any like noticeable increase.
distortion.
Like distortion remains infinitely low no matter what.
I think it's at a point where you could, as long as you're not cranking it, you could probably already do that. No.
Yeah, the big question for me would be whether the sensation contributes significantly to the perception of space.
Yeah, I was thinking about this, right? So you take headphones like, okay, this is a typical. This is a bad example. A typical, like baffle with a cup behind it kind of thing, where the driver is very close to your ear, and you compare that to the way something like an HD800S is designed, where the baffle is the cup in a sense, right? Like it's way further back. Does the fact that it's further back, what kind of contribution do you think that has to this sort of perceptual effect?
If sound
I don't know.
is equal, or if FR is equal.
If FR is equal, would that sound wider? And another example is you can have, so the 6XX and 600 are effectively unangled, right? Like the way that they couple to the side of the head is there is no angle to the pads, from what I can tell, right? And like they're symmetrical, right? Whereas a lot of other designs will deliberately angle the driver inside the baffle in a certain way. And I'm wondering if this also has the potential to have some sort of perceptual effect if FR is held constant.
I mean, if FR is held constant, it shouldn't, right? But like the question, assuming that we're just talking about acoustical effect, there is a good argument for angling drivers regardless, though, which is that your ears are not flat. So
Yeah, but
otherwise,
wasn't it?
then your ears will sort of poke up against things.
Yeah, I
and
know. I'm
that's-
just like the tradition. So like you can't. But the point being there too that like holding FR constant is kind of like working against the grain in that when you're changing the condition slightly. But one of the arguments that I typically see is if you make more use of the pinna, right? Like if there's more pinna interaction versus beaming it directly into the sound hole of your ear, you
I mean,
have the potential to get more spacious, right?
One problem with this specific narrative, of course, is that in this space, you're not talking about ray-like propagation. Like,
Yeah.
the wavelength is small relative to the dimensions. So what you're large relative to the dimensions. So what you're talking about is more like modal response. So what you're changing is the shape of the resonating volume and the damping at specific points. I think that an argument could be made that a forward angled driver might be preferable for a number of reasons. I think that its effects beyond ergonomics they're going to be not necessarily logging to, a given person's HRTF, but also not necessarily not correlating, right? Like something that's closely coupled to the middle of the concha, maybe you're bypassing some elements of the pinna, or more accurately, you're not having meaningful
It's not
effects from
interacting
resonance
as
between those points. Yeah. This is one of those things where there's like an argument to be made, but I would really want to test it rather than
at least with the HD. So I am currently testing this. So I'm curious what you think. But my theory with the HD 800S though is that part of it has to do with just how large where the pad sits on the head is actually a much wider area. Like it's a larger area than where like a typical, pad would sit on the head, with where the opening itself is also quite a bit larger. So the degree to that, like I'm not sure how much of it is just that effect, right? Having playing a role, right? How it physically couples.
I mean, there's definitely ergonomic things which I do find, and it's hard because once you think about them, then you're technically evaluating it sighted. But like, I find that headphones where my ear is touching the pad has a notable effect on making it sound smaller. Like the stuff that sounds bigger to me is the stuff where my ear is completely floating.
Clamp force too.
Yeah, clamp force definitely. But the reason why I'm still, even though it is cited, somewhat more confident saying that I think that that's the thing is because even on headphones, or that it's not just a function of, well, the acoustics are physically different because the volume is larger, is because even on those headphones, if I just move it slightly so that like my ear is just touching the pad a little bit, suddenly like my perception of spaciousness changes.
Yeah, there are also headphones that don't touch your ear at all, like the ear speaker types, which are tuned in such a way that I would assume they have like minimal soundstage.
And to me, they do.
But
to me, that realm,
some of them, like the K1000, I get no soundstage on that.
But a lot of people report them as being spacious. So
but to me, they're not. Like it's, what are you being primed by here, right? And there is maybe a sense in which 6XX soundstage memes is just clamp force.
Could be.
All right, let's get back to the spice here. Technicalities should just refer to how easy it is to EQ something. That's not a bad take, actually. Like if low modal features low distortion. I'm not opposed to that.
It could, but that's not how it is.
That's not how it is, but
I mean,
they're saying it should just refer to this, right? Like what not even specific to do with EQ, but like the factors that ultimately would lead a person to have an easier time with it, like lower modal.
I mean, one could be argued these are actual technical metrics of the headphone,
but
like
that's
low
what they're
acoustic
arguing.
impedance and like driver tension affecting the modal response.
Yes. Absolutely. I'm on board for this. I like
Those
it.
are more technical parameters
They
than
are, as is harmonic
detail.
distortion. Lower harmonic
Yeah,
distortion is a
it's just
technical
these
parameter.
parameters can also be measured, so I think people wouldn't
Yeah,
wouldn't
but that's
find them
the
very
thing.
useful.
I like this take. I agree with it. Chasing details in endless rabbit hole. Sure. Audivina is art. Is Audivina art?
Yeah, definitely.
Not all art is good.
It's
Yes.
the same. Well, but well.
It's the
I
long
earlier
haired
gave
piece of
I
headphone.
gave the
art
example
for me.
of the art installation where the person you walk up the stairs and at the top you sit down and you feel nauseous. That's the Audivina.
Yeah, sure.
All right. Timbre isn't just frequency response.
Then what is it?
Well, frequency response at the eardrum.
Mm.
No, but usually when people, this speaks to the common misconception, right? Like usually when people are talking about frequency response, they're talking about what they see on the graph, not what the graph is showing the measurement of. Yeah. I will say, like, there are still, like, I get this issue, like, there are times when the graph is like so far off from what I experience that I can understand somebody having a similar kind of level of like, this doesn't match at all with, or this doesn't capture at all what my experience is. So therefore I'm just,
I was going to
um,
kind of back up what he's saying by saying timbre exclusively resides in the area of frequency response that rigs are basically not that useful for measuring anyway.
I would disagree. I think I think the ear gain range entirely is highly influential.
I'm not sure that rigs are that reliable in this region.
Oh, you're saying specifically for ear gain.
Well, no, I'm saying like everything above 1K, like the
Yeah.
area where we know rigs to sometimes be decoupled from a human experience.
You're saying, yeah.
Sometimes with
Well,
a
I don't
fairly
know.
wide range.
I think the other issue though there is still to do with like the things like consistency across heads. So it depends a little bit on the headphones design for some of the rest of it, because you can, like, when I listen to like an Aria Unveiled, it very closely matches the rig, like what the measurement shows. Like it's very, very similar to the point where I'm able to make confident EQ adjustments
Well,
for the ear,
the question there is which rig?
both the Gross and the 5128. And the HPTF variation
I
as
guess it's
shown
pretty
between them is
similar
extremely narrow.
across them, but
Yeah. That's kind of the point, is that like the more consistent the design, the easier it is to identify those things.
I mean, up to a certain point, though.
Yeah, of course, there's still
Yeah.
going to be limitations. But something like 3 kilohertz, it's bang on for where it is for me.
Hmm.
Same with 5 kilohertz, and I know this because that's the problem. That's the only problem.
Hmm.
But I
I
think the
heard
general.
Andrew is a closet V-Moda fan and loves their small, painful pads.
Where did
Out.
you hear that?
Get your
JTP.
case said that.
Wow. Okay. So you mean JT?
Unjustified, untrue non-belief.
All right. I was thinking the whole timbre isn't just frequency response. Like usually that comes down to like the whole driver material thing, right? And I've made that mistake before, right? Like that's
like the take as people normally hold it.
yeah.
Sounds right.
Usually people say it's like the whole,
Well, they say
co-
that or it's time domain.
Oh, right. Okay, here's one
Which
for you. Here's one for
Which
you.
headphones have been
Timbre.
well, hang on, wait, just following on from that one. Which headphones have been the biggest discrepancy between the measurement and your own experience that you've
For me personally,
yeah.
oftentimes closed-back headphones.
Yeah.
Because
I was going to say, for me, it would be something like the DCA Stealth, probably.
yeah. That's a perfect example, or Expanse, right? But and also actually the Noir X.
I haven't tried that one yet.
Yeah.
Dwarfs.
No, I was going to say, just with this, the whole timbre thing, there is a sense that potentially there could be a component to it that isn't just frequency response, which is that in IEMs you have with BA designs you have often elevated third and elevated fifth harmonic distortion, and people do report BA timbre. I don't know if this is, You don't like it?
Boo! Boo!
You don't like it?
I
I
hate
would be
this take.
interested in testing that, but I think that people are much too quick
So,
to
do
give
you think that
nonlinearity.
do you think that it's in with BA designs and IEMs that it is a
I
FR
think it's
thing
a
as well?
total nothing burger, honestly.
Like, these people are making stuff up.
Well, no, I just think there are like enough other problems in the frequency response of most IEMs that
No,
like
I'm not here. No, I'm
have
not calling out. I'm not saying that the elevated third and elevated fifth is like something that we need to worry that much about. I'm saying that maybe people are identifying certain harmonic distortion properties, like odd order harmonics, and they're
I mean,
then
with IEMs,
Oh, and
you
they're
also
running
have
with that as an
they're
explanation
running with
for
that
Stanford.
exactly. I'm not saying that this
Oh,
matters.
well, yeah, they're wrong. I don't like that.
IEMs. There's a lot of other things like they've got crossovers in them. That's something which is very different to headphones. And so in those crossover regions, there's going to be behavior which could impact timbre depending on where it is.
I would say though, like
Insofar as it
traditionally,
impacts the linear and nonlinear
so
transfer
the thing is
functions.
though, like traditionally, like people, if you look at all those like older IEMs, like even from like several years ago, they had all we didn't understand IEM sufficiently, let's just say. So
We
like
still don't, probably.
probably not, yeah. And just the way that IEMs kind of function, like there's so many scrungles there where like timbre, somebody reporting, a bad timbral experience with an IEM could be literally anything. It could, I mean, as far as the FR is concerned, it could be all kinds of colorations to do with like, well, because it's bypassing their pinna, or because there are genuinely like other like in situ weirdnesses that show up as a result of the insertion depth, length modes, etc. So like what that is in my mind a bit of a crapshoot. All right.
R0 said, we already know we perceive FR differently at low and high volumes, and yet we don't have any method to predict or show perceived intensity difference for different volumes. Is this... So I remain confused by this point. Why do people think that preferred response changes as a function of volume? Like, it seems to come from equal loudness contours.
The people like the Fletcher Munson stuff.
Well, yeah, but IRL sounds don't change their timbre as their level changes. Like, yes, they're...
No, but your sensitivity does matter. So like I'm not basing it on equal loudness in terms of like the published whatever that's out there. I base this on the fact that when I listen to an IEM tuned to a certain target, I can only listen so loud.
I know what you're saying.
I literally cannot get as
And-
loud as I would like to listen with many IEMs.
And as it
Maybe
relates
that's a
to
good
that,
thing.
well, yeah, but as it relates to that, like,
The added tinnitus changes timbre.
people tend to prefer loud, when something is a little bit louder than something. Like, usually the one that's a little bit louder is often the thing that is a little bit more preferred if you're doing like, if you're trying to do level match stuff, right? And I'm just thinking, well, there might be situations where certain tunings allow them to turn it up a little bit more. I mean, it's the Odyssey thing all over again, right? Like, there's certain effects that get it imparted as a result of increased SPL. Anyway, can I bring back my production is overrated take? No, get out of here with that.
Bad. Get out.
You can
I mean,
you can say
Blaine
like,
probably likes it.
It's
mix and
overrated
mastering
by some
quality
and
is
underrated
overrated.
by some.
Yeah.
Sure.
Using auto EQ is never a good idea for any headphone. That's a spicy take. There are too many variables, and it's unlikely a measurement is ever 100% accurate for any given head. Maybe not that spicy. That's pretty spicy. The thing
L
is,
plus ratio
No.
plus nirvana fallacy.
Okay.
and you call me cringe? What the fuck does that mean?
We touched on this a little bit before, but I think Rizal, you had a good answer, which is that because I'm not generally a fan of EQ because of the limitations of how representative the measurements can be and how representative the correction can be for you. But then you made the point that we kind of underestimate how many like really bad headphones there are for which auto EQ can be a massive benefit.
If you can
And
take
that's-
something, if you can take something from 40% to 80% with auto EQ,
Yeah.
it's beneficial to do, even if it doesn't get you to 90 or 100%.
Auto EQ is never going to make something perfect because the limitations prevent that. But it can definitely take something that's terrible and make it okay.
Indeed. What do you guys have? You guys
What
are
do you-
having.
It's just
Talking about-
incoherently laughing at a screenshot of me now.
Can you please send this to me?
I'll send it to chat, not YouTube channel. Put it in the server.
Well, I just see the camera, Lisa.
The camera Lisa is interesting. For the record, the Nirvana, god damn it, that fucking image is gonna become a fucking reaction image. The Nirvana fallacy is indicting or saying that something is bad because it is imperfect. Auto EQ is imperfect, absolutely. It can still be a meaningful improvement, and for most headphones, it would be.
Thank you. I appreciate the explanation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's fair.
But like, so I empathize with where this person is coming from because they've had a bad experience with auto EQ, probably from a headphone that wasn't all that terrible. Tried to do it, and it didn't really make it ideal or what they were hoping
Same.
from it. So,
Okay, Stefan's got one saying, considering your position in this stream and prior streams, you shouldn't speak about things like DAX and amps before having the relevant proof, aka public ABX. But whilst Blaine, I know, agrees with that take outright, but what I want to say is we're not saying that you shouldn't use these like terms to describe stuff, or that you can't say anything unless you've got a peer-reviewed study saying exactly the thing that you want to say. Blaine might write this on. We're saying that saying something as a fact in terms of like this is something which exists outside of frequency response or whatever, that you shouldn't be doing. Using shortcuts because of the limitations in interpretation we have is fine. Like, yeah, subjectively describing spaciousness or timbre is perfectly okay to do. What's not okay is to say that like frequency response can't possibly capture this and it's completely unrelated.
wasn't there a guy at one of your CanJam presentations who was going after you for saying because you had a certain amount of influence or something? Do you remember this? There was a
Yeah, there was a guy who. Well, I'm trying to remember exactly his words.
Wait. Are you talking about Sorov?
It might have been Sorov.
Yes, yeah, it was Sorov. I don't think he was like going after me for that. I think he was saying that when you have a certain level of influence, you have a responsibility to kind of be responsible in what you're saying, which I agree with.
Yeah.
But yeah, like
I'm just saying it relates to this point a little bit.
I try to be as objective and reasonable about stuff as I can, but that does sometimes mean understanding that we don't know if the 2 kilohertz dip for absolute certain makes things more spacious, but everyone talks about it because we kind of have enough data to say that it probably does, and it's a good shortcut.
I wouldn't say that.
But here, hold on. The bigger point here is whether or not it's okay to throw out conjecture.
Because I mean, if that's the stance, then no one can review anything subjectively.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. Like you can't.
So Blaine's salivating at this possibility.
Yeah, I know Blaine likes that take, but
yeah.
I do agree that for certain things there is enough agreement that you can say this is one possible circumstance wherein you would get spaciousness.
Here's the thing though, like with all of this, there's a possibility that there is actually a soundstage thing and that all of us are wrong. We do not actually have evidence of this. The issue is more that the burden of proof is on the other foot. That's kind of how I look at it, right? Like we're saying here's the thing we can measure. We know it's influential on what people prefer when it comes to sound quality. We know it's highly influential. We know all these other things, like for example, time domain stuff is proportional to frequency response. So the burden of proof for the soundstage stands. It's up to them to basically demonstrate that there is a there when it comes to soundstage, or when it comes to soundstage as a separate thing, right? Us saying it's a most likely to be an FR relationship thing shouldn't be the controversial thing. The other thing I was going to say there is, even though a lot of what we talk about is conjecture, I mentioned this on one of the forum threads not that long ago, which is that when you get a bunch of people like the Blaines and the Constantines and the Griffins in the world in a room and us, even though we may disagree on certain things, there's going to be certain foundational agreement. And that's because, regardless of whether or not there is like a study that demonstrates that it's true. And it's because we've all the things that we've tested and that the things that we've gone through with regards to EQing things to our own HRTFs, etc., to try and understand this stuff has led us to the same conclusions about some of these things, or what we've researched, right? For example, through other means. So yeah. So
I think we're not taking the stance that this stuff should never be uttered. It's that you shouldn't utter things as a fact without proof. But I don't think that you are free to describe your own subjective experience entirely as you wish, regardless of what other people agree or disagree with about it, or what the reasoning behind that, or whether it's even real might be. Your subjective experience is your subjective experience.
You can have opinions.
Comes in when you say, I like this headphone more than the other one, so therefore surely this driver type is objectively superior and it's got lower distortion, even if that's not true. It's like, when I, measure, if I'm reviewing a digital to digital converter, just to take something as an example, and I say that I think that this one is better than the other one, I also measure it and show that, yes, it is actually improving jitter. If I say like this device reduces jitter, and then it demonstrably doesn't, or I don't bother to check, that's a problem.
Mm-hmm. Let's do one or two more, and then we'll end it.
We have a lot of spicy takes left.
We do.
I think I'm gonna do the Discord thing if anyone else wants to join me.
Let's do one. Yeah. Let's do one more spicy take. We'll move the rest to Discord.
Sounds good.
Okay. Should we do? Okay.
Whichever one you want.
Let's be honest. By the time the community at large can more accurately correlate FR to technicalities, we would still be using said vocabulary to describe things just because it's easier. So this gets to a question that we had this topic originally, which was, it's related to this. If everybody in the community understood this stuff, would the high-end industry exist? we might
that was almost one of the questions.
Yeah, we'll maybe save that one for a different one. But there's a sense here in which if we could understand FR in terms of I like this question actually. If we could understand FR in terms of technicalities, would we still talk about technicalities, or will we start using the FR relationship language? And I kind of think, okay, when you and Blaine or Cameron and when we're discussing things privately with headphones, do we do the technicalities language? I don't know that we do. No. I don't use it. So I don't know that.
Not frequently, but you do.
I've used it publicly. I'm just saying amongst ourselves. I don't typically talk to Griffin or Blaine or Douglas about I don't describe the soundstage of a thing like ever. I've maybe described something
because you don't care about that, even regardless of the reasoning for it. Part of that is that it's not interesting to you.
Yep, that's true.
I don't know that that's true though. Like, I think it's more so that the way you think about the sound has been so fundamentally altered.
It has.
That you don't even unpack it in terms of those things anymore. Now it's just about if the tone is good, those things will be good.
But it's true. But Cameron is correct that the spaciousness effect, even though I am able to perceive it, is not one that I'm going to index for.
Yeah, because that's usually an artifact of tone being bad.
Yeah. I'll just notice the tone being bad. The maybe a better one is like detail versus bluntedness. I may have I've probably described things sometimes as this sounds blunted, or something like that, right? I don't know if I do so with any sense of seriousness behind the term, though.
Yeah,
if that makes
I was saying it ironically.
Use it has been tongue in cheek with me.
It's a little bit tongue in cheek, right?
Count it.
Yeah. But at the same time, my default sort of disposition on this stuff is not to use that language these days, which is kind of a shame, because that disqualifies me as a reasonable reviewer to a certain segment of the community. Oh well. This is a wonderful picture.
This template's gonna be good.
Yeah. All right, guys. Let's we're gonna end the stream here. And we're gonna move the rest of this discussion with Blaine and listener and anybody else who wants to join over to our Discord, where listener, you're gonna set up a stage.
Yep.
Okay.
On discord.gg/headphone.
Yep.
So bring your
Headphones
spice-
chat
headphones
for
pro.
anyone who wants to join.
Yeah, we're trying to make it so that we cut these streams a little bit shorter because we realize that for a lot of people it's difficult to. You see the 4-hour thing, you're like, Jesus Christ, I'm not going to watch that. Which is fair.
Meanwhile, 3 hours, totally reasonable.
So much
Yeah.
more accessible. So
yeah,
we're
but
gonna
so
experiment with
if you guys still feel like the streams are too long for any reason, do let us know and we can maybe do what we're doing
more of it
here, where we cut
more
it
in
even
Discord.
shorter, but have an after party on Discord or something like that. Yeah, just let us know.
Yeah. All right, and with that, Blaine, do you want to take us out?
Yes, I will. You
You're
don't
the
have to
best now.
prompt me every time.
I know, but I.
Oh my God. Anyway, it's so awkward. You're so awkward. Anyway, this has, as always, been brought to you by Headphones.com, your #1 place to learn about and buy audio equipment, speakers, headphones, DACs, amps, cables. We've got the majority of it, and anything you get from us that is not specifically delineated otherwise can be returned for 365 days for a... Do we still do a refund on the first one? Yeah, it's a refund minus the handling fees because we're open boxing it, or alternatively for trade-in for something else that you might prefer. So you can buy with confidence from us, knowing that you will end up with something you're happy with. Let's see. In addition to this show, we have obviously this whole YouTube channel, but also written content at the audio files at headphones.com, a community at forum.headphones.com, and the aforementioned Discord, discord.gg/headphones, where we're going for the after show. You should join all of these places and contribute to them. Ideally, contribute well to them because they've actually been improving lately, and I'd like to keep that pattern going. As always, this channel is essentially a money-losing endeavor, so if you guys do not financially support headphones.com, we will die of starvation or of cold in this cold winter.
And just for folks who might be unaware, Blaine gets truly wild in the after parties. So,
Do I?
yeah,
We haven't had an
Unhinged.
after party yet, but trust us.
Blaine Unhinged.
Blaine unveiled.
Yeah,
Blaine
unveiled. Oh God! All right. Once again, on that terrible disappointment, it is really time to end. So thanks to everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you guys in the next one.
Bye, everyone. I'll see you on Discord
Goodbye.
in like 2 minutes.